Test, test. Ooh, we have audio. Alrighty. Let's see if anyone shows up. Technically, we start at 2:08-ish, and today it's only 2:06, going on 2:07, so I'm actually a minute and a half early. Jamie, you're the first one here. Welcome to the stream. Hi, Michael. Thanks for being late. Guys, today's topic is going to be something that, I've been hinting about that I want to do a video on for so long. And someone recently, I can't remember who, I can't give him credit, but someone recently said, why don't you just do a live stream about calcium reactors? And I thought, yeah, I can. I mean, obviously I can talk about it. I just felt like, I need to give you guys the video. As you guys know, I am quite the procrastinator, or maybe the most patient person on the planet. So some things take a while to happen. But hey, we are doing this stream today and we're going to talk about it. So first of all, I'll switch cameras to show you mine. So right here is my Comor pump that is putting in 70 milliliters of liquid into my sump at all times. And then I'm going to point, there's a little piece of blue tubing that's dripping in the sump. That is the liquid coming out of the calcium reactor all the time. And I like to have it be a steady stream, not quite broken up like that, but it doesn't really matter. So, that's just where we're at on that. And then there's a bunch of media in there. So anyway, I want to talk about all of the different components and what we use to make them operate. Because some of you have never had one. You think it's some weird thing. You're used to two-part dosing. And, I get it. But two-part dosing is becoming so expensive in components that you're almost to the point of buying a calcium reactor anyway. Where in the old days, it was like, calcium reactor, it's going to cost you about $800. And you're like, oh, well, I can make my own alkalinity. I can make my own calcium. I can use driveway heat for magnesium. I can put it in by hand. It'll cost me, like $50 a year. Why would I spend $800 on a calcium reactor? But now, you've got the dose from Apex. You've got the Comor forehead. You've got these really nice containers that hold your different solutions. I mean, some of you use things that are inexpensive, like Rubbermaids or cereal containers or milk jugs or whatever you can get your hands on. But some of you like to buy something fancy made of acrylic, and when you do that, the price obviously goes up as it's another component of what you needed to have this reactor. So first of all, I want to tell you in the video's description, I put the link to how to set up a calcium reactor, so you can click on that whenever you want to read it. If one of the moderators wants to grab it and paste it into the chat, actually I can do that because it's still in my memory. So that is the link to the reactor setup. And so we're just going to talk. The point of a calcium reactor is to dose alkalinity and calcium to your tank 24 hours a day. We typically don't slow it down. We don't speed it up. We set it up with the intent that we can forget it and don't have to think about it. And for the most part, if you set it up correctly, the way I was advised to do it way back in 2004, you'll find that it's actually really nice. So what you've got is an acrylic thing that holds the media. So I just happen to have an acrylic thing here next to me. As I told you guys, I'm either the most patient or the biggest procrastinator on the planet. This is a calcium reactor by Aquamax that was sent to me by Marine Depot for a video, and it hasn't seen a drop of water yet. But I want to talk about it because this is a great way to demo it versus mine that's all full of stuff and it's hard to see. So what you've got is a chamber that this will be where the media goes, and we want aragonite-based media. In the center is a riser tube, so basically you have water flowing down. No, I'm sorry. The water's going down through the center, and then it weeps up through the holes and comes back up the top and works its way out. On the side are some extra components. So this right here is a bubble counter, and I'll explain that in a second. This is a filter that will filter your water so you don't get detritus in here. But I think it's going to be something you have to keep cleaning, so I don't know how I feel about that. And then this right here is where the pump is hidden that circulates the water in the reactor 24 hours a day. I mean, that always has to run. I asked them, why did you guys put this box in here? What does it do? And they said all it does is trap the sound, so it's quieter. Like, okay, fair enough. So you don't necessarily have to have the box on there. And if you have a fish room or you have a basement where you're setting this up, you might not even need that on there, but it's included with the reactor. Now on the top are a bunch of different fittings and openings. Right here, this is where you would put a pH probe that would measure the pH level inside the reactor at all times. You've got the liquid coming through the filter. This is tank water coming in. It's being pushed in with a pump, and then it goes through this valve and into here. And they actually put a needle valve on here so you can adjust how quickly the water goes into the reactor. Then you've got the bubble counter. So what a bubble counter is usually this is a solution of liquid. I like to use glycerin, which Marine Depot sells. And the CO2 tank is going to be this thing right here, CO2 tank. And you're going to have a regulator on there. That's the one thing I don't have over here to show you guys. See, I tried to remember all the pieces. Okay, so a regulator is very, very important. It goes on the tank. It has 2 gauges. The one gauge shows you the pressure of how much air is left in the tank, how much CO2 is left in there. And the second gauge is the pressure going into the reactor. It's very important that you set the pressure to 6 psi, not higher. We're not trying to blow this thing apart. We're trying to put in a bubble of CO2 in here. So when you first hook it up, you'll get the tank filled up. This is a 5-pound tank. They have larger ones like 20-pound tanks. They have little cute ones too, but 5 pounds is pretty good. It's actually what I use on my tank. You'll have the regulator. You'll turn it on. You'll see the gauge go to like 1,000 psi. That means it's a full tank. And then you'll set the second gauge to 6 psi with a knob on the front. And then what happens is when the CO2 is going into this thing right here with the glycerin, you'll watch the bubble go bloop, 2, 3, and it's literally the ability to count the bubbles. And the reason you use glycerin and not just regular water like tank water or fresh water is the bubbles move through it really slowly like a lava lamp so you can count them accurately. So I really do like that part. My own calcium reactor behind me is so old it no longer has a bubble counter. What had happened was I think too much CO2 got in it and it just completely crazed it like a spider web of cracks. I was like, and that part's done, and I threw it away. And I've been without a bubble counter for 10 years, at least. But the CO2 that's bubbling into this very gradually is lowering the pH within the reactor. And then because the pH is getting lower and lower and lower, the media inside will melt. So this is an example of some aragonite media. This is Reborn. I use this stuff. It's from Two Little Fishies. It comes in 2 different grades. This is very heavy, by the way. It's 8 pounds, 4 kilos worth. And this is the small version, or what they call, if you look right here, it says Little Reborn. I like the large nuggets, honestly, but that's been out of stock, and so I have some of this in stock. And you put this in the reactor. This is all calcium-based coral that's been harvested and cleaned up and prepared for us. And we put it in the reactor, and as the pH drops, that stuff starts to melt. So I hope that's starting to help you understand what's going on. Now, the pH in your tank, let's just say the ideal is 8.3. And the pH you need in the reactor is going to be 7.1, 6.8, 6.5. You know, it's somewhere lower, a lot lower than your tank. And then what's coming out is called the effluent. That is the fluid that is coming out of the reactor. In this case, on this one, it would be coming out the top here through a tube and drip into the sump. So this reactor came with a bunch of pieces of tubing. I have a whole bunch of choices. So I've got green tubing, I've got black tubing, I've got some white tubing. All of that was included. And as the liquid comes out and it's trickling, which is what I prefer, or if it's dripping out, that will be adding a drop of alkalinity and calcium, every single drop that goes in the tank. So what we want to do is we want to have the right amount of alkalinity coming out of the reactor. It's really an alkalinity reactor, but everyone calls it a calcium reactor, and it does both. The nice thing about a calcium reactor is you never think about calcium. You never have to dose it. Your calcium just always is what it is, which I would say is usually around 400, 425. That just, it never varies. And if you ask Dwayne, he says, I'd never check calcium. And he has a calcium reactor. It's because alkalinity is what we care about, and the calcium just is coming out anyway, so you don't have to really worry. But I still test it every week. And today is water test Saturday. All right, give me a second. All right. The rule of thumb with any calcium reactor is these three things. 6 psi pressure going to the reactor, very, very important. Don't mess that up. I prefer a pH of about 6.5 in the reactor, but you can start at 7.1 and see what your results are. And then the effluent coming out of the calcium reactor should measure between 19 and 35 DKH. If you're anywhere in that range, it's doing its job. If it's coming out at like 16 and your tank is already at like 9, you may discover it's not keeping up because it's not coming out, it's not melting enough. So how do you melt it more? By adding another bubble. So instead of doing anything else, you can increase the CO2 going in. So instead of 1 bubble per second, you might put in 1.5 bubbles per second. Or you might do 2 bubbles per second. You have to find that sweet spot. And what will happen is it will go into the reactor and start to, the extra CO2 melts the media, right? And you're watching the pH, that probe that's in that reactor, to tell you what the pH is within there. So 7.1 isn't enough of a melt. You try 6.9. And so those are the three things you need to know. The other thing you need to know about calcium reactors is whatever change you make, you have to wait 24 hours to measure the results. You can't just twist a knob and then 5 minutes later check it. That's not how it works. I mean, other than trickling out the effluent, but alkalinity, calcium measurements, things like that, it takes a day to see what effect it had on what you did. Now, there's a very important tool that I started using. Again, the same person that was recommending how to set it up in the first place. He recommended to me that I get something called a pH controller. So this is the new version of the Milwaukee pH controller. I have an old one that's green, and it would hang like this on the side of my aquarium, and it's over there right now. But this is the new one, which is kind of big and clunky. I'm not really a fan of its different look. I hate change. Do I sound old? And you've got some calibration solutions in here. Calibration fluids. You've got your... Let me see if I've never unpacked this. All right, let me pull everything out. Boy, that was really well packed. Man, I've had this thing so long. I wonder if the pH probe included is still good. Looks rather dry to me. Let's take a look. Oh, that's kind of... Oh, it's still moist. Yay. Okay, cool. What a weird holder. I'm going to add some liquid to this to keep it from going bad. So the pH controller actually has a pH probe included. And this probe minus the cup, you'd remove this. That was protection for shipping to keep it moist. This will fit into the top of the reactor, and it'll measure the pH within. That probe will be plugged into the bottom of this controller. And you might say, well, what are you going to do with this thing? Why do you have it? I'm going to use it on the frag tank. That'll be nice. Now, it's got a funny looking plug on the end of the pH controller. And what this thing does is when the desired pH has been reached, you set it to 7.1. The water's coming in at 8.3. It's going to run and run and run and run and run until the reactor measures 7.1. As soon as it hits 7.1, you're going to hear click, and this outlet is going to go dead. And the point of that is so that no more CO2 gets into your calcium reactor. So the regulator on the CO2 tank, this thing right here, has a solenoid built in. They have to have a solenoid. If you just get a regulator with no solenoid, you're up a creek. So I would recommend you, I know what I would tell you to buy, and you'll have to find what works within your budget. But you get a regulator with a solenoid. A solenoid is a valve that mechanically or using electricity closes and opens based on power. So if there's power, the valve is open, and when the power goes out, the valve closes. And that's how they work. So what this thing is doing, when it hits 7.1, or whatever number you've picked at, it will then shut off the power, which tells the solenoid, hey, there's no power, turn off the CO2, save the tank. because it's like a safety. The solenoid's design is that if there's a power outage, you don't want to keep pumping CO2 into your aquarium, which someone with a planted tank where they bubble in CO2 around the clock, they don't want the CO2 to keep going in and driving the pH lower and lower and lower. It's dangerous. And so it's a safety mechanism. But for our purposes, it turns off the CO2 going into the calcium reactor, and we don't get any more melting for a while until the number rises again. And what happens, because remember, you're trickling in water into the reactor constantly. So as you're pushing in 8.3 into a reactor that's 7.1, after, I don't know, 10 minutes or so, it might be 7.2, it might be 7.3, and probably around 7.4, you're going to hear click, and this comes back to life. CO2 is now released into the regulator and then bubbles back into the reactor. So that's how all these pieces work together. It's a lot of components. It's like 5 different things you need to run one. But then it's basically, like I said, set it and forget it. Now, if you don't buy this thing and you want to just dial it in manually, what I was told, thank God I never had to do it, you would set your bubble rate, set your flow rate, check your effluent coming out. You do all that stuff, and every single day you test for like 23 days in a row until you finally get it just right. And then that will work for a while until either the pump clogs up and it's running slower, the feed pump acts up and there's an issue, the corals are growing so fast they're soaking on more demand than the reactor's putting out, and you have to make another adjustment. Using a pH controller or using the pH probe from the Apex, the secondary pH probe, you can use your Apex controller to do this job. So if you own an Apex, you don't have to buy this thing. You buy a PM1 module, an extra pH probe, and you let it run. So that is the most important part of this whole topic, was pH controller. And it's the only way I've set one up. Now, I need to show you one last piece of this thing, obviously. So this is your controller. This is your power brick that you're going to plug in the wall to give power to this device. And then this is what the CO2 tank's regulator is going to plug into. I hope that makes sense and doesn't leave you saying, well, how does it all work? And like I said, the article for this topic is on my website. It's in the video's description, and I stuck it in the chat, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes ago. So hopefully that will kind of give you some insight. So now, let's actually try to fill up the reactor. All right, get this thing. Quick little intermission. I made this thing for a customer, I don't know, New Jersey or something, and I made 2 of them. He only needed 1. This is a bracket that will actually fit under the tank, screw into the wood, and he could put some kind of a GHL device in there. And so I wanted to show you guys something I made once. It's made out of white acrylic, and I never work with white because you can't see the seams, so you don't know if the glue is holding or not. Now, when you need to fill up a CO2 reactor, calcium reactor, you're going to have to remove the lid section. So everything has to be disassembled and removed, even in this situation here. Mine is mine is different. It's made by Life Reef. I mean, this one's mine too, I guess. And you have these twist screws or thumb screws on the top. All right, we'll remove this assembly. Now it's not so top heavy, by the way. Now, this right here is your bubble plate. So in the bottom is a bunch of little tiny holes that water is going to flow through. There's always going to be an O-ring in the top. You want to always use silicone grease on the O-ring. So if you don't own silicone grease, go to Home Depot where they sell the kitchen faucets, and you'll find a little tube. It looks like a, man, it's hard to describe. It's tinier than a tiny toothpaste. And you'll just open the lid, cut off the top, and you'll put a little bit on your fingers, and you'll just take your O-ring, which of course now it's on. I can't get it to remove. You just take the silicone grease and you just go like this. Just kind of put a nice clear coat. It doesn't have to be on there like toothpaste. We're just getting it to grease this up so it improves the longevity of that O-ring so it doesn't leak. Now, always need a shot glass. So this is my shot glass. I've been using it forever. It says Texas on it, of course. Put that over the tube And now when you pour in your media, it will go in there. Now, another thing I like to do, and I don't have it handy, so I'm just going to have to kind of take my time. I like to use a funnel that has a big opening. And there are funnels made for canning jellies, and they have a nice large opening that fits around. But if that doesn't work, you could take the top off of like a 1 gallon jug, you know, like a bleach bottle or some kind of vinegar, white vinegar. Take that, just cut it in half, cut off the very top to make it wider, and you set it right over your shot glass and have room to pour in and not miss and make a mess everywhere. Let me try something here. Okay, this could be really messy. All right, so we're gonna try to get this in the reactor and not all over the floor. Now, with a lot of these products, we think, oh, don't use too much at first. You definitely use everything you're supposed to use with a calcium reactor. We don't want to use not enough. So in the case of this project right now, I would actually fill this all the way up to about here. You know, you're going to fill it up with media, and don't worry about using too much because it's not going to put out more than the melting point of the pH. So my reactor is always up to here, and after a few months, it is down to about here, and then a couple more months, it's down to here, and then it's basically time to put more in. And what I like to do when it's time to put more in, I like to take it out of the sump, pour everything out, rinse what's left in a bucket of water, and then put what survived back in and add more media on top. And that way I'm not wasting any. If you make a terrible mistake, if you have a catastrophic failure and the pH gets too low in here, the worst that can happen is everything in here turns to mush, like oatmeal, and it's absolutely worthless. And then all you have to do is dump it out, rinse it out, put new media in, and start it up again. But it won't crash your tank because all the things happening are happening inside the reactor rather than happening in the tank itself. So in that regard, I feel that a calcium reactor is a much safer option than I would say a caulk reactor would be. So we've got a reactor here. I'm trying to get you guys squared away here. Wow, this camera looks completely blue in comparison. Weird. All right. So here's our reactor media. Let's pretend it's full to the top. Then we will put our top piece back on, and you have to line up this part here with this tube. And then we turn it because it has keyhole slots. And we would tighten this down enough that no liquid is going to come out that O-ring. Oh, this one has to stay tall for a second. Actually, it doesn't matter which one I do. I'll tighten this one down. Also, once you've got the media in here, it's not top heavy anymore, which is nice. So we're going to tighten this down. And now if you're looking at the top, you can see how the O-ring is being pressed, and it's got a nice seal. If you are running this inside your sump, if it were to leak and just drip out, that's okay. It's dripping in the sump, and that is not anything to be concerned with. I mean, you want it in the tank anyway, so that's not an issue. But, you know, hearing doink, doink, doink might bug you. So you would just have to tighten this up a little bit more. I don't use pliers or anything like that on them, and after it's been sitting for a long time and it's hard to undo, I'll grab a rag and just use it to grip, and I can untwist it. Another thing you can do with that silicone grease I told you about is you can actually take the silicone grease, the same stuff you put on the O-ring, and you can put a little bit on the threads, just put some on, and then you'd screw it in here, and it makes it easier to remove later. So that's a nice tip that I would love for you guys to emulate to make your life easier 6 months from now when it's time to touch it again. And then, you know, the next piece, this part would go on. And we'll reconnect our tubing. Reconnect this one. And then we would have a piece of tubing. We'll just open it all up. Hey, this stuff looks like RO tubing, but it's a little softer. Just a little bit softer than I'm used to. Kind of nice. And then we have another piece of tubing, which I guess you could use this green one. I'm not sure why they included these different colors, because there's also a white one. So you have a lot of choices, but whatever your preference is, I would use this black tubing to run to the CO2 tank. And maybe for consistency, since everything on the top is white, maybe put the white tubing on the top. And then there's another fitting here. I'm not sure what this is for specifically. I haven't seen it before. Seems to be too tight to push this in. Oh, yeah, you can force it. All right, so I guess it's a way to clip it somewhere in your sump or in your baffles or something to hold the where it's dripping. So the other end would go in here. And you could then put this anywhere you want in the sump to drip, drip, drip. Now, one more thing they included, I'm sure they did, is a precision needle valve. And the needle valve, you'd cut this line, you'd install this, oh, let me just open it. Okay, so you would cut this tubing. There's so much tubing here. You would cut this, install the needle valve, and I ran it like this forever, by the way. And then by twist, this is the reason it's called needle valve is one tiny twist changes the liquid coming out just a fraction. So you have water going in to the reactor, and then this controls what comes out, and you control how quickly or how slowly it comes out, drip, drip, drip into the sump, or a nice steady trickle like I like to have it, and you control it with this knob. And you may have to adjust it, and then for weeks you don't have to touch it at all. And then you find like every day you have to do this tiny little twist. And you're like, oh. And the next day, tiny little twist. And then the next day, okay, it's good. And then the next day, oh, let me back it off a little. And that's the nature of a calcium reactor. It's not that you have to do a lot of work. You just have to look at it and make sure it's working. And that's not unlike dosing. I was just talking to someone that was over here a couple days ago, and he told me how he had all his solutions, he has all his dosing pumps, everything's great, but his alkalinity, and he was not testing his water, he told me that. He said, I haven't tested in forever. His alkalinity was 5. And he said, I don't understand how it could be so low. I've got all this nice gear. But as you guys know, the end of the tubing, a lot of times that we trickle in clogs up, and you have to like squeeze it and roll it between your fingers and unclog it so liquid can come out. It's very important that anything you're dosing with a dosing pump or a calcium reactor or whatever your calc reactor, top off, anything has tubing, you want to make sure the liquid comes out the other end by pushing a test button from time to time. So that is basically what I wanted to show you guys. Now, I'm going to give you a quick tour of my actual calcium reactor that's in use, so that way we can kind of finalize this topic, and hopefully you will understand enough about it that you can say, I want one too. So let me switch this camera for a second here. Hopefully I won't break this thing. Let's see. Wow, I'm getting more blue by the second. How funny is that? Well, I could turn on a white light in here. It wouldn't be the end of the world. But, all right, let's start with the calcium reactor. No, let's start with a CO2 tank. So we're going to take this camera here, and we're going to put it over near all the components. I got to set that up. I got to get up. I'm so comfortable here on the floor. It's going to be impossible to get up. All right, and we got to make sure I have enough microphone wire too. Let me pick up a couple things here really quick, guys, before I move so I don't break anything. And also, when we start doing the question and answer part, we're starting something new. So when we're doing any kind of questions, for me, because it's really hard for me to tell what's happening in the chat because there's so many of you guys talking, please put @MilesReef and then your question, and that way I can answer it. And that way I can look for @MilesReef as I scroll through all the comments. And I will try to tackle every question you guys send me. So that is our new system. All right, I have enough wire, I think, to where I can move around a little bit. right, let me switch to this other camera. Okay. I feel like this some wire is very short. Okay, I think I'm okay. So down here is my CO2 tank, another 5-pound tank. This is my regulator. It's called a carbon doser from aquarium plants. And right now it's showing my PSI going to the calcium reactor is at 6. See, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. If you can't see that, maybe I can get a little closer. And then it shows my pressure in my tank is somewhere around almost 1300 PSI. So I've got a full tank, which is true. I only hooked this up recently. The carbon doser has a knob down here that I can dial how many bubbles come out per second. It can be 1 bubble per second, all the way to 1 bubble every 10 seconds. So that's 1 bubble per second, or you wait 10 solid seconds until a bubble comes out. But then this little range down here, this is fractions of a second, and you can get all the way down to 0.1 of a second. So you could actually have 10 bubbles in 1 second flat if you wanted to. I tend to keep mine less than 1 per second. It's probably 1 per 0.7 of a second, if that matters to you. Then up here is my pH controller. Remember I told you guys I have a green one? This is by Milwaukee. It's showing right now that the rate in the reactor is at 7. That's what it's measuring. I actually put myself a note last year because I kind of made a mistake and misunderstood what I was looking at. I don't know why that happened, but it did. So I told myself I want my target range of 6.1 to 6.5, and that's where I was keeping it, somewhere around 6.4. Right now, it's showing 7.0, and it's showing an alarm, meaning that the CO2 is not flowing right now. That's just how this thing works. And the reason it's at 7.0 right now is because my Trident has already measured, which is in the apex. The Trident has measured and said your alkalinity is over 9 DKH, so do not add any more CO2. So it actually stopped this thing from getting any more CO2. And that was a new thing I did, and I did a whole article about this on my website in the blog section that you guys can read. So you got CO2 tank, you've got the regulator, this is the carbon doser. There's a red little LED down here that when it's running, it'll flash. And that's how you know how many bubbles are coming out per second, because it'll go flash, 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 or it'll be flash, flash, flash. So instead of actually having the bubble counter, like I told you I don't have, I can look at this red light and see at what rate it's coming out. This is the, oh, there's a dot. So it just came on. This is the tubing that leads to the calcium reactor. And now it's coming out basically at less than 1 bubble per second. So let's go back to the calcium reactor now that you've seen all that. And the calcium reactor is behind this big hose. Let me see if I can set this up. This is a life reef calcium reactor. I have so much stuff in the way now, I can't even move around and show you things the way I want to. Let me see if I can adjust this a little bit more. So now you can see the life reef reactor right here. And in the foreground here is my Kimura, and it's just spinning away. It's moving 71 milliliters per minute. Some people have it coming out super slow, like 2 milliliters a minute, and I don't know why they do that. I honestly don't understand it. I have been running a steady trickle for so long, and that works for me, so it's what I recommend, but I understand being cautious when you first set one up. But after you're comfortable, you should go with what works best for you. And this is my tubing that's going into the Kimura from the sump, so it's just drawing up. Let's scoot this back a little bit so you can see. So I've got some tubing down here, I'm pointing to it. It's drawing, I can't tilt this far enough, there we go. It's drawing water up from the sump, goes into the Kimura, comes out the Kimura, and then this piece of orange tubing turns into a piece of blue tubing. It was all a matter of what fit this nipple right here. But then it switches to blue, it actually switches to black, then to blue, and then goes into the bottom of the calcium reactor, way down there. So you see that right there? And then I have a mag pump, mag 7 pump, that is, I'm gonna have to really shake this camera around a bunch for you guys. I apologize. But down here, oh, let's see. Down there, under all that, is a Mag 7. And in front of it is a pH probe. That's the pH probe for my pH controller. And it's measuring the pH inside the reactor. On the new reactor, the pH probe fit in the top. And then the Mag 7 circulates the water over and over nonstop. And then out the top of the reactor, you can see a little bit of liquid is coming out, and there's some bubbles. And that is what is leading to my output tubing, which I put a blue piece at the end so I could see it more clearly. And that's where you can see it trickling into the sump. And it's basically trickling into the area almost directly over my return pump's intake. So whatever's happening here is flowing right in there, getting sucked in and pumped up into the tank. Because this is coming in at a very slow rate, there's no need to like mix or do anything interesting in the sump. It can just be there. All right. I think that's everything I want to tell you about this. So maybe we can start answering questions. All right. See if I have enough wire. Alrighty. You know what? We got a lot of blue in here. It's going to drive me bonkers. Let me turn on a white light. Any better? Slightly better? So, I hope that kind of made sense to you guys. Hey, somebody called my wires a rat nest. That's actually a really organized area. But there are wires. You cannot completely hide them. They're somewhere. Plus, when you have to unplug something, you have to unplug it. All right, so let me roll up here and see what all I missed. Lots of chatter. We've got 236 people on today, right now. By the way, a couple of you guys in the beginning of the chat let me know that the audio was good and the video was good. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Okay. I actually remembered to plug in the Ethernet cable this time. Let's see. Oh, great question. JR says, what size tank does this make it economic? When is it a good time to get a calcium reactor? Okay, so as you know, we have some people in this hobby that can be a little bit over the top. You know, they're pretty obsessed. And they will buy all this gear, and you're like, holy crap, that is a lot of gear for this 30-gallon aquarium. I would not say you need a calcium reactor for a 30-gallon. It's just unnecessary. All you need is a couple of simple dosing pumps and some liquid nearby, and you can just trickle in what you need each day. It's a really small system. But I would say once you hit like 120 gallons, 180 gallons, 240 gallons, 300 gallons, you definitely want a calcium reactor. The one that I just showed you guys that's in my sump came with my 280-gallon reef. And before that, I was dosing something called B-Ionic. And B-Ionic is amazing. It's really good product. That's a two-part. It's not DIY. It's pre-mixed by ESV, which is the brand. And not only does it have the alkalinity, the calcium, and the magnesium in the 3 different bottles, it has like 70 other elements included. So for years, I was dosing B-Ionic to my 29-gallon and to my 55-gallon, which made sense because they were small tanks. But when you go with a larger tank, you would need so much B-Ionic to keep up with, it would become, expensive. So then you're like, well, let me go DIY and make my own solutions to save money. And, back then we didn't have the dosing pumps we have now. Now we've got things, that are super convenient, and we can control them with our phone, which is awesome. And we can program in and know when it's running out of solution. We have controllers like the Apex that can do all of this and let you turn it on and off from across the room or when you're out of town. It's gotten a lot nicer. But when you have a bigger tank, and you're trying to keep a reef, it's not just an aquarium with rocks and fish. If that's the case, you probably don't need to dose much at all. But if you're trying to maintain a reef with LPS corals, with SPS corals, with clams, you know, gorgonians and all these different types of creatures, then you're going to need something that's stable and continuous and reliable. And a calcium reactor is all those things. You never, if you go Google right now and say my calcium, you know, look for the phrase "my calcium reactor killed my tank," I don't think you're going to find a lot of articles. I really don't. It's unheard of. What usually happens, like I said earlier, is you turn the media in your reactor to mush. And so you just dump it out and you put in a new bag of media and you're back in business an hour later. And it's no big deal. It just sucks. You're like, well, that cost me 20 bucks in media. Yeah, mistakes happen. That's why we have to check things and inspect them and make sure all is well. But once you've got this set up on your tank, in theory, you're just going to basically glance at the tank every single day for, I don't know, 15, 20 seconds. I mean, you might glance at it 40 times, but my point is, you open your cabinets, or like me, I just walk up and look down. I see if it's trickling out. I see what the pH level is on that display. And I make sure that the trickling tells me everything, because the flow rate coming out tells me the flow rate going in is fine. If it's just barely coming out, then either the pump pushing water in has a problem, or the tubing has gotten obstructed somehow. But I mean, I'm looking at pH and I'm looking at flow rate, and that's it. And you just do that for months. And I was for a while there, before I had this Kimura FXP continual dosing pump. Before this, I was using tubing off of my manifold. So here's my manifold right here, and this valve right down here has a John Guest fitting on for the RO tubing. And I had one of these needle valves connected right underneath, and I would turn the knob slightly to adjust. And when my tank sitter came over, he had to constantly fiddle with the knob, because it was just like clockwork. Everything's working perfectly, and then it's time for me to leave town, and then for the next 5 days, the reactor wants to do its own thing because I'm not around to keep an eye on it. And my tank sitter's like, oh, the calcium reactor again. So he would have to adjust this from time to time, and then, you know, I might come back from the trip and I have to adjust it a few more times, and then it's good for a few weeks. It's kind of weird. It's kind of a moody thing. But I got away from this. I got away from all that. I'm using a continuous dosing pump. Now, this came out 2 Machinas ago. And as soon as I saw it, I was so excited. I could not wait to buy it. As soon as I could buy it, I ordered it, and I've been using it ever since. I had my first one for probably about 3 or 4 months, but there was something defective with it, and I just contacted CoralView, and they replaced it with a new one. You do need to grease this from time to time so it stays quiet. And actually today I tried something new, and it's amazing, and I don't know if it's going to work. But I thought, you know, this works on power tools. I'm going to give it a shot. So I put it on there today, and it's nice and quiet. Instead of it starts off dead quiet, and as it gets used, it starts to make this click, click, click sound. And obviously, the slower it's turning, the slower the click. But it was a minor little click, and since my entire fish room is so quiet these days, you know, the water flowing in is so quiet that now I hear things like a click, and I'm like, oh. So I really do like everything being as quiet as possible now. It's getting a little too obsessive, actually. I need to back off and calm down and realize it's a living biotope. There will be some sound. But, oh, I was going to tell you, the newest one just came out. I saw Premium Aquatics is selling it. They have a new version of this exact pump that now it has a screensaver so that the display doesn't mess up. Mine never did, but apparently it happened for some. I guess it just stayed on with the same number all the time. So now it has a screensaver. But the newest part is it has Wi-Fi built in, which means you can control it with your phone to like program it. Instead of having to fiddle with the knob on the front, you can actually set a number in your phone and hit upload. And I was like, you know, I kind of think I need a new one now. We always want the latest. But, oh, I do want to say this, because this question comes up all the time. I should have said this in the beginning of the presentation, because I don't know if anyone's going to listen all the way through to 44 minutes and then finally hear this, but they're going to say, do you push it in or do you pull it out? They always ask that. Is the water being pushed into the calcium reactor or is it being pulled through the calcium reactor? Push it in. Everyone asks this. I think BRS gets the credit for why this crazy idea came up about pulling it through. You do not have enough pressure in your plumbing to blow a calcium reactor apart. So You do not need to fear damaging it. The CO2 tank has a regulator to control the CO2 gas going in. It also will not blow it apart. Push the water in, and that way it'll trickle out. If you try and draw it through, you're actually disabling the ability to change flow rates because it's on the outbound side. So you need to push the water in, and then you'll use some kind of needle valve for the output. And this isn't going to be like the end all. It's not like I'm pushing in water at 100%, but I'll crank this down to 99% off. What you do is you put in the flow rate you want with whatever device you're going to use, if it's this thing, if it's a manifold, whatever you're going to do. And on this manifold, I would open this valve just slightly enough to get water coming out. And I would have this open 100%. It's wide open, water's just blowing through it. And I would twist the knob down until it's barely coming out, and then I would tighten this a fraction more to get it just right. So you push water in, let the reactor do its job, and then what comes out the other end is what matters. Okay. I'm actually interested to see how many, I've seen a lot of people saying they want calcium reactors, and for a while there, it just seemed like calcium reactors were the red-headed stepchild. It's like, why would you get a calcium reactor? That's crazy, and everyone is against it. And I see more and more people talking about them these days. I've been using one for so long, I can't imagine being without one. And I tried 3-part dosing on my frag tank, and as you guys know, the frag tank's been a nightmare. That's why I got this calcium reactor to put on that tank to make my life easy. And I hope it makes all the difference because it's really the way I prefer it to be. Oh, another dosing pump that just recently came to market is the Versa from Ecotech. And the Versa, I believe, is $150, where this one is $300. So, and the Versa is a continuous duty pump also. It's made to run all the time. And that is the thing that you need to know about a calcium reactor is it runs all the time. We're not going to turn it on for 15 minutes and then it's off for 45 and then it's on. And if you try to cycle a dosing pump on and off, it'll kill it. But a continuous duty pump like this one or the Versa can run nonstop forever. And the whole point, these pumps, you know where they got started was in hospitals. There was a brand called the Masterflex that a lot of people would buy used for $1,200 to control their calcium reactor. And the thing was about this long, and it was about this wide, and it was about this tall. It was like a shoebox. And you had to find somewhere to put this ginormous thing, and it'd be very quiet, and you just twist the knob to the flow rate you needed. And then this little adorable thing came out, and I was like, yes! And when I built the sump, I actually built it with an area on the top here specifically wide enough to hold this pump, as well as that pump, and then the cooling fans behind it. But not having to have the huge Masterflex was awesome. And so going to this little one is great. And the Versa is even half of this. It's even smaller, and it has a bracket hanging on the wall nearby. And you would just run tubing from the sump into the Versa, and then out of the Versa into the calcium reactor. Okay, so let me address some very specific questions. 70 milliliters a minute? Damn, that's a lot of effluent being dosed. What pH are you running it at? What is the DKH coming out? So last time I checked the DKH coming out, it was at 80, which is why I raised my pH in the calcium reactor from 6.5 to about 6.7. And I haven't checked it recently, but like I said, the blog on my website about using the Trident to control my calcium reactor, it spells it all out. It uses something called limiter code, and what it's doing is it is limiting how long the CO2 can be on every hour besides what the pH controller says or what the calcium reactor wants to do. If the Trident measures and says your tank is above 9 DKH, it limits the CO2 tank to basically, I think I've got it, if I remember correctly, it's on for 20 minutes of every hour, and it's off for 40 minutes for a 6-hour window. And then if the tank measures 8.9 on the next alkalinity test, it lets the calcium reactor just run completely normal with CO2 going through as needed. And then if it gets above 9.0 again, then it does the limiter code. And it has made it so much easier to regulate the calcium reactor. It's making my CO2 tank last longer, My media is lasting longer because I'm not melting it too fast. Now, if we weren't using all these devices to control it, what kind of expenses would you run into? Your media should last you, when I got stuff, this stuff here, or ARM from Carib I would have thought it'd last for a solid year. It's this stuff right here. But with my size tank, the 280, and then of course with the 400, I pretty much have to refill my reactor with more media about every 4 months. So basically I have 4 months worth in a bag. And the CO2 tank tends to last about 5 months. Usually it runs out of gas right as I'm about to go out of town, and I freak out. So I have extra tanks. This one was actually sitting by the front door today, so I will take it to the liquor store and refill it. So when this tank is empty, if I'm not home, my tank setter can swap out tanks. And that's very important. So when you buy a tank, you kind of need to think, I'm going to need a second tank. Maybe not immediately, but try to have it. You want to have gas on hand. You want to have media on hand. You don't want to use up every drop and have none left for when you need it. So there is a little bit of inventory you need to maintain, but it will take care of what your needs, around the clock, where you don't have to think about it, which is nice. There's also a media by two little fishies called, I think it's called Re-Mag, R-E and then M-A-G for Re-Magnesium. And it looks like these little crystals. And so you fill up the calcium reactor with your aragonite media, and then you put the Re-Mag on top, which is like, an inch or two worth. And that is supposed to help dose magnesium into your tank at the same time it's dosing alkaline and calcium. However, I didn't have much luck with that. I've tried it a couple of times, and I don't know if my melting point wasn't the right level. All I know is when I cleaned out the reactor, to like reuse, like I told you, I'd rinse the used media and I was going to put that back in. The Remag seemed completely unaffected, like it all still existed. And I tried some other product once where I poured it in the calcium reactor, and as soon as I added water, it just went poof, like cotton candy inside the reactor, and it was gone within 15 minutes. Like, well, what was the point of that? So, not every single thing on the market's going to work, but I just mix up Magnesium Pronto, which is another two little fishies product. It sits over here on the floor next to the sump. It's got a small Camor pump, and that trickles in the magnesium separately from the calcium reactor. It's just simpler that way for me. All right. Shane says, how much does your calcium reactor swing per day over 24 hours? I don't know. Remember, I'm using a pH controller. If I was using the Apex to run the pH and be the controller, then I could watch a graph and I could kind of see the ups and downs of the pH within the calcium reactor, but I haven't done that yet. And actually, it would be a logical step to go that route. I just haven't done it. But if I were to do that, then if the pH was wrong in the calcium reactor, it could send me a text or a notification saying pH is too low, pH is too high, and it could bring it to my attention so I could address the situation. And I talked about this in another blog very recently on my website, where I said that the CO2 tank had run out. And I'd been watching the gauges, and it was like full, and then it was empty. And the pH had risen, but the pH controller can't communicate. But the Apex, being the pH controller, could totally communicate and give me a heads up, so I'd know I need to replace the tank and install it and get everything going. So I don't know what the swing is, but I mean, I would say if my set point is 6.7, we're probably looking at 6.6 to 6.9, 7.0 on and off throughout the day and night. It just stays around that number because of the pH controller. Ray's Reef says, what size reactor would I need for a 150-gallon tank? If you'll go to Marine Depot and look at the Aquamax calcium reactors, they show which ones are rated for what size tank. So I would follow those directions. The one I showed you guys here, I believe, was made for God, for some reason my head's telling me 200, 210 gallons. And I'm putting it on a 60-gallon. So it'll be a little too big, but I have the room for it, and it'll just stand in the return zone by the return pump, and that'll be that. But yeah, it would be nice to have the right size. Number one, if you go too big, it takes up space in your sump. My sump has plenty of room, so that's not a factor for me. Hi, CJ said the same thing. I talked to someone else, and he said on this reactor, to remove this pre-filter, just eliminate it. Instead of having this in here, I mean, you could actually take this out, this floss, and just let water flow through it. Or you could just run the tubing straight from your feed pump directly into the reactor, and this part here would be eliminated. You wouldn't even need, well, you still have the bubble counter. But this, like I said, this stuff will clog up with detritus, and it slows the flow of water going in. So it's something you'd have to stay on top of, and that's kind of like a hassle factor. So you were the second person that said they got rid of it, and it totally makes sense. My other one doesn't have one, so why would I need one on this one? Something that you might want to add to yours if you don't have it built in the reactor is the tubing that goes back to the CO2 tank is put in a one-way check valve. And that check valve, of course, is going to let gas go this way, but it will eliminate the possibility of basically when the CO2 tank turns off, the water going into the reactor and the fact that it's churning, recirculating, it can put some back pressure and send some water up that line towards your CO2 tank. So by putting a check valve in there, you prevent the water from possibly getting all the way down to the regulator to damage it. So I would recommend a one-way check valve going toward the calcium reactor to prevent any kind of liquid getting backwards. My tubing from this calcium reactor must travel about 6 feet to the tank, so it's still not a factor, but I still make sure the check valve works. And, I have the tubing set up to where it actually goes up, and you can see it behind me. It's going all the way up, and then it travels across the back of the sump all the way. Okay, I can't do my arm anymore. And then it goes all the way across this way, and then through there and down. And for the water to go up the tubing and up and across all that distance, it's not something I have to worry about. But it's smart to protect your gear from that kind of damage. Oh, here's a good one. Alfredo says, am I the only one that feeds the calcium reactor through gravity? I don't measure the pH in the reactor. I just measure KH in the tank and adjust CO2 bubbles. Wow, okay. Well, number one, yes, some people will just actually have a small hole in their tank with a bulkhead and a small fitting, and then gravity just drains right into the calcium reactor. That is a thing. I've seen people do it. I'm kind of a chicken when it comes to putting holes low in the tank. I don't want to take a chance that that is a spot that can leak. That's why this tank above me has solid glass everywhere, and it goes out the top into an overflow box because I don't want to take a chance of damaging it and or having a leak that flows out the bottom of my tank. So that's my own personal choice. But gravity, yes. The other part, yeah, well, you chose a different approach and you dialed it in and you've made it work. I assume that you have to measure your alkalinity kind of frequently to make sure you're still on target, because the CO2 that is going into the reactor is coming out in the effluent, which affects the pH of the tank as well. So let's get into that. That's another important part of calcium reactors. Let me pull this off the screen. So if I run out of CO2 and my calcium reactor is just running, but just tank water is going in and there's no CO2, so basically it's filling up with tank water and tank water is coming out, and it's, let's say it's going in at, let's just use the magic number 8.3. It's going in at 8.3. The reactor no longer is coming out 7.1. It's not coming out 7.5. It's not coming out 7.9. It's coming out 8.3, just like it's going in. That is completely normal. That's how it's supposed to be. When you first set it up, before you even turn on the CO2 tank, the pH going in is going to be the pH coming out, because that's just what it is, just another way to move water through a bunch of media, and the media is just sitting there ready to go but can't do a thing because it needs to melt, and it can't melt in regular pH. When you hook up the CO2 tank and you're running a calcium reactor, you'll probably notice over time that your tank was always at 8.3 in the past, and now your tank's always 8.1. And you're thinking, well, why can't I get 8.3 anymore? Because the CO2 tank is driving it down 0.2, and that's 100% normal. So if you're normally a guy that runs a tank that's like 8.1 to 8.3, you're probably going to be running a tank that's 7.9 to 8.1, and that's okay. There's a lot of reefs. My reef is doing it. It's doing totally fine. You've seen the growth. You guys watched the 6-year anniversary video. People come over and like, oh my God, these corals. And I mean, so it's obviously a lower pH is not the end of the world. And you don't have to be 8.3. That's just this target number that a lot of us like to strive for. But there are a lot of healthy reefs out there that are running 7.7 to 7.9. Now, can you do anything to bring up that 0.2 to avoid depressing your pH? One of the tricks that I've never done, but I've thought about a billion times, and a billion is probably accurate, not some over-exaggeration because I thought about it a ton. You can add another chamber of reactor media. And the effluent goes into that media and trickles down through it and weeps out the bottom. And as it's going through this extra chamber of media, it's actually driving the CO2 off. And so it could help bring it up. So I've thought about adding something in my sump, but it's just one more thing to keep an eye on, one more thing I have to build, one more thing that I have to kind of maintain, and I've not done it. I've been running the same calcium reactor setup now, basically, other than changing the Camor pump, 16 years. The first couple of years, I've been using that same pH controller the whole 16 years. I tried something temporarily for a couple of years in the middle that failed me twice, and I threw it away. I wouldn't even sell it to someone because I didn't trust the damn thing, and I went back to my green pH controller, and I love it. So I've had that the whole time. The regulators, I used to use a Milwaukee regulator, and that had 2 gauges and a solenoid, but I had to buy a new one every single year. They cost $100, and I was like, you know, every year some part of this thing breaks. The bubble counter has a problem, the gauge has a problem, the solenoid stops working, and I had to buy a new one and a new one. And it seems like every year I was spending $100, and it was really bugging me. Aquarium Plants came out with this thing that they called the carbon doser. Back then it wasn't called that, I don't think. And at the time when I bought it, I believe I paid something like $210. And it said it came with a 3-year warranty. And I had thought to myself, well, I've bought 3 Milwaukees. I'm already $300 in. I'd rather spend $210 on this thing or $229 or whatever the thing cost. And that way I have a nice 3-year warranty. I don't have to think about this thing anymore. I don't have to worry about it. And I don't have to fix it. And so I bought that thing, and I've had it ever since. And in the meantime, Aquarium Plants keeps raising the price on that thing. It's really expensive now. I think it's over $400 for that aquarium doser. And they are the only people that make it. It is basically probably a patented thing that they've invented. One of my friends actually took one apart and said, you know, the insides are not that complicated. I think I could make my own. I was like, all right, cool. Yeah. I mean, I would hate to have to buy another one because they cost so much now. And it was funny because they updated their website at one point, and I got an email saying, hey, aquariumplants.com has a new website. We need you to log in and create a new password. And when I went to the website, it showed my original receipt from like 2010, and it showed the low price, and I looked on the website what it costs now, and I was like, wow. I mean, it's pretty much doubled in price. But it's an awesome device, and I completely trust it. So if you want to go that route, you can. If you don't want to spend that kind of money, then I would say buy the Apex, which is going to cost you between $500 and $800. And buy the PM1 module, which is probably another, I don't know, $80 with an extra pH probe. And you can eliminate the pH controller entirely. But you'll still need a regulator with a solenoid, and I really like the Aquarium Plants one. So that is my advice on all that. So I kind of bounced around on that topic. Okay, hang on a second. I need to check something. Just need to see if this is important. All right, never mind. That wasn't critical. I thought it was something important that pertained to the stream. Sorry, guys. Let's see. Another brand of calcium reactor that a lot of hobbyists swear by is by Geo's Reef. So if you're looking for a calcium reactor, you know, I said Aquamax because it's affordable. Geo will cost you a little bit more, but everyone loves them. They are really happy with them. There is one that I don't like at all that I believe is KNOP, Knop. or Knopp. It's a German brand. I just hated that thing. It was basically all the components were like bolted to a board, and you had to put this panel on the wall, and it was really skinny. It might be good for a small tank. I found it very impossible to work with, and I was trying to help someone with their setup, and it was really frustrating. So I just have to say I don't like that one. I wouldn't recommend it. My Reef Creation makes some calcium reactors. They also make professional high-end gear, as you saw in one of my videos, where it'll cost you a lot of money, but it's built like a beast, like for my client. So you can keep that in mind as well. All right. And then the diameter of the chamber matters. So if you have a little, little skinny chamber going all the way, and let's say it's really tall, 3 feet tall with media, it's not like you're going to have this great result because you have plenty of media, it's just really tall. A lot of times you're going to want the chamber to be 4, 5, 6 inches in diameter, and then you're going to have pounds and pounds of media in there. You know, you might be using a full, I used to have a square jug in here. Oh, it's full of magnesium. But you may have used 10 pounds of media in the reactor, or maybe more, or 8 pounds. It just depends on the size of the reactor. And then you can always top off more. You don't have to fill it to the brim. You got to have a little bit of space at the top, but you want the water to circulate, and you want all the media to be in there. And you don't want to forget to top it off. Let's see. Frank says, my BRS inline TDS meter requires a strange battery. Do you sell an inline TDS meter that uses a regular AA size battery? Yes, I do. The one that I sell is really easy to read. It's obviously in and out. I consider it to be really professional compared to the little ones I see so often that just seem so cheap. It's made by HM Digital, and it's not cheap. It's like 40, 50 bucks on my website. It might be 50. And that one is what I've been using for years. And when you take off the 4 screws off the back, it uses a single AA battery. And it lasts like a year before you have to replace the battery. All right. Chris says, I am getting a new 10-foot long SPS tank. That's awesome. I'm thinking about mounting a gyre from the Euro bracing along the back wall, as I think the MP60 on the sides will not provide sufficient flow. You will probably need multiple things in multiple places. You might even want to consider C-swirls for the returns. The C-swirl is a device that sits on top of the tank, kind of looks like a plastic box, and the water goes in the top, and then the water comes out the bottom, and you put your nozzle on the base, and then it will pivot the valve back and forth very slowly, as many degrees as you want. It can pivot 90 degrees, and it can pivot 120 degrees, it can pivot 180 degrees. And you could have your return lines sending water and constantly changing direction at different flow rates, which would be nice. You can have your gyre or gyres on the tank. You can have MP60s on the tank. My tank has a couple MP60s, a couple flow accelerators, and an MP40 that creates the flow. And my tank is 7 feet. So at a 10-foot tank, it's even more important. I think you'll need more than one gyre. My friend who has a 1,000-gallon tank, which sounds like yours, I think he's got 3 gyres in his and 4 C-swirls. And he actually added a surge tank that I built for him years ago that he's never put water in. So one day I hope to see that thing operational. Okay. Aaron says, do you find any aggression between your 2 yellow tanks and your purple tank? And would you recommend keeping a yellow and a purple in a tank, in a 120-gallon tank, or is 2 yellow tanks and 1 purple tank? I would say, well, number one, the purple tank is the dominant one and chases the yellows. And then the 2 yellows, they always are bickering, so I call them Frick and Frack, because they're just like those brothers, the German brothers that always fought. So there's that. And I watch the purple chase down 1 or both of the yellows on a regular basis. I think in a 120-gallon tank, I wouldn't recommend the purple. I would probably get a couple of yellows and enjoy what you got. You could even try 3 yellows. But 1 each, you kind of need a 6-foot long tank. The purple tank gets a little bit bigger than the yellow. And the yellows, I mean, they live a long time. I forget what it was. In my head, it's like 22 years. I mean, it's a big deal. And they're going to need space. Let's see. This is interesting. I'm not familiar with this, so I'm just going to read it to you guys. Jose says, I've been treating bryopsis with FluxRx, I think is what he means. I noticed my alkaline and calcium go up during treatment, so I turned off my calcium reactor during the daytime, and I only dose at night, and that made it stay stable. That's interesting. I wonder why that would happen. Yeah, that's surprising. All right. Cliff, I saw your post on Club Mueller's Reef. Yeah, thanks. By the way, a lot of people have applied for Club Mueller's Reef over the last week, and I have not had any time to add anyone. There's like 120 of you guys waiting, so I will be adding you later today, and we'll get that done. But I've been, this whole week, all I've done is hurt and work, and I have been focused on getting as many of these back orders finished and out. And I wanted to show you guys something I built. The person that asked for it said, hey Mark, anyway, that thing on the screen right here is inviting you to join Club Mueller's Reef. If you haven't joined, you might as well join now. That way I can add you later today. But it's a great group. We don't fight, we don't bicker, we don't let people put each other down. I mean, we really watch closely. And if there's anything that seems to creep up, just tell us and we'll handle it. You know, we'll look at it. If it looks funny to us and you're just being sensitive, we'll let it go. If they legit were out of line, we'll take care of it. One way or another, we don't allow it. You know, we have a rule: be kind. So if people aren't kind, they're gone, and there's no second chances. So it's not like they get to have one bad day. Nope, your bad day just cut you out of the group. The group is made to be friendly intentionally, so that people can feel comfortable asking their questions or sharing their experiences, even when they're bad. Like, for example, someone just recently this week mentioned, or I was the first person to see it, I think, he lost 15 of his fish overnight. And it was a horrible accident, and he was heartbroken. And he said, I don't even know what to tell my girlfriend when she comes home tonight, because she's just as attached to these fish as I am. And there was tons of nice comments, and there was one person, of course, that was a total jerk. And he's no longer in the group, because there was no need for that. Why would you attack someone when they're down? It's just, we don't need that kind of poison that's in the world inside our group. We want a nice, friendly group, and we are determined to keep it that way, you know, even if we lose some members to do it. So just always be on your best behavior and shouldn't have a problem. And if you are joking, make sure it's really clear. Say, I'm joking, or put an emoticon with a laughing, crying face or something, so we realize that it's a punchline and not, I'm being a jerk. You know, don't do that. Okay, so I want to show you something I made. Kevin has been very patiently waiting for this order, and I finally got first one of 2 built. So this is a 2-zone dosing container that has these polycarbonate lids that come off so you can refill it easily. So funny I talk about calcium reactors and then I end with a dosing container. And he needs 2 of these. So he needed to be able to dose 4 different things. So I made the first one, and it came out beautifully. It has the rigid acrylic tubing in there to draw liquid up through the John Guest fitting. You'll connect tubing on top to a dosing pump, and then it trickles into the sump. And each zone holds a gallon of liquid. So that's a nice container. I think this is, I don't have a tape measure handy. I think it's 10 inches by 12 inches by 5 inches maybe. But, so Kevin, your order's almost completely done. The second piece is all cut out. I just wanted to finish one because you said, show it on the live stream. So I could see that ending up on the website as a regular item. It's pretty nice. And see, it'd be good for someone that wants to dose AcroPower, or someone that wants to vodka dose, or alkaline calcium, you know, magnesium. I don't know what else. You know, there's all kinds of these Red Sea products that people like to dose. Trace elements, you know, there's that. You wouldn't put Nopox in it because apparently Nopox just would destroy the acrylic. So. And Tim, thank you very much for the reminder. You're right. And it is on the top of my hit list right now. He's saying, get the mixing pump on the saltwater container fixed so I have some salt water. And he's right. I need to just tackle it. Man, the last 2 days, I was hurting so bad. I mean, oh God, I woke up yesterday too early. And I said, nope, it's too early. I'm going back to sleep. And then I woke up like an hour and a half later, and my neck was just, I mean, so locked up, so on fire. I was like, oh God. I felt like what I should have done when I woke up the first time was like get myself situated better on the pillows so my neck was not like kinked or something. Oh, it was awful. And I took pills and I struggled through the day, and I was able to get eight orders out last night. And I was really glad to do that because some people have been waiting really long. And I feel immensely guilty when people are waiting on their orders. You have no idea. I try to just keep working and moving forward and just keep making progress. And I've got like 3 or 4 people that go way back that still need to be satisfied. And as soon as I get those orders out, the pressure is going to feel great to be off my shoulders because I'm super aware that they're not done yet. Thank you very much, HCB Chemistry. It looks like .com. He said, I like that you're showing the product and how customers can use them to help their tanks. 2 thumbs up. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Yeah, that's the whole point of this channel, is to help people. Let's see. Martinez, thank you very much for mentioning Destaco. It is a different type of device. I even looked into getting one, I guess a year and a half ago. It just was outside my price range. I think that one was going to cost me somewhere around $2,000. And I just didn't want to go that route. It was different than what I was used to. I would have had a whole new learning curve. But yeah, there's all these different alternatives on the market. But what I showed today is standard. And a lot of people can do it. It's not overly complicated. You just get the components, and then one day when you've got them all, you just build it all together. And some people are running hybrid systems where they run the calcium reactor to do the bulk of the need for the tank, and then they use dosing pumps for the last little bit. And that way, if for some reason, like for example, if they're using the Apex controller and they're remote and they realize there's a problem with the calcium reactor, they can actually, through the app on their phone, tell the dosing pump to put in more alkaline and more calcium for the next few days till they get home so that the tank continues to be okay. So that is a nice method of redundancy. I don't see myself doing it only because I work from home, and while I do travel, I do have a tank sitter that comes and checks on the tank every day while I'm gone. And we've made it 16 years without it, so I just don't see myself. I'm trying to get away from those types of dosings at this point. I want calcium reactors, so yeah. I think what I'll do, like I said, is add the PM1 module, add another pH probe to the calcium reactor, and remove the pH controller itself. And that way the Apex can notify me if the pH in this calcium reactor is out of range. If it's crazy high or if it gets way too low, I would get a text and an email saying it's wrong, and I could look into it. Let's see. Reef King says, it's like a science lab. It totally is. It's kind of overwhelming when you're doing it. All right, again, I want to remind you guys, for me to find your questions, I need you to do @MilesReef before you type your question so I can find it. Because there's a lot of conversation happening in here again. This one here is talking about clownfish. So apparently the clownfish are fighting constantly. They're just bickering, and when they fight, they usually bite each other's mouths, and they can cause injuries. Hopefully that aggression will stop. If they are both the same sex, like 2 female clowns, they will duke it out and one will survive. That's just the way it is. It needs to be a female, which is the larger fish, and then a male, which is usually half the size of the female. That's pretty common. If you put in 2 little tiny clownfish in your tank initially, as they grow, one will become female, the other will become male. And then, you'll see the smaller one is like doing this sideways swim and kind of shaking like it's having a seizure. And it's saying, I'm not here to fight. I want to be your mate. That's their little dance they do. But when you have two clownfish biting each other's mouths like that, it's not good. You might need to separate them and then maybe reintroduce one again and see if the aggression stops. Or you may have to get a different clownfish that gets along with the one you have. If you're getting a replacement, make sure you get one that's half the size of the one you have now. Coral Lovers says, I'm using two-part at this time and planning to switch to a calcium reactor. Do I need to switch over slowly because I don't want to shock my corals? You won't shock your corals. You're giving them exactly what they were getting before with a different device. So basically you're going to need to stop dosing because you have to be able to measure what the tank is getting as you're getting used to your calcium reactor. There is going to be some variance in the water quality because you're going to have to figure out flow rates and pH levels and bubble count. But you follow the guidelines in my article, first of all, and some of the points I brought out in this video, and that will help. And then, like I said, you're going to measure every single day. So you're going to see if there's a trend. If it's going down, you're going to increase the melting point by lowering the pH a little bit more. And you're going to see the alkaline come up the next day. And you're like, okay, good. That's the number I want. And then you test the next day. And if it's still good, you got it. And if it's not good, you adjust it slightly more. And it's just, you're dialing it in. But no, you don't have to keep, if you try and do both at the same time, because you're trying to taper off of one and get on to another, it's going to be super confusing because you won't know which is doing what. If you've got a calcium reactor putting alkaline in the tank and you've got a dosing pump putting alkaline in the tank, how do you know which is doing the job or which is doing the bulk? You're like, well, I'm only putting in 10 mLs. Like, okay, well, still, you're not sure what the calcium reactor is doing. So you need to you're going to switch. And your corals will adapt and it will be okay. But if you test every single day, it won't get way out of range because you're on top of it. If you test once a week, like our weekly water test Saturdays, yeah, that could be messy. So when you're installing something new like that, you need to test every single day and see where things are at to make adjustments. Insane Reefer, thank you very much for the super chat. I appreciate that, and I'm sure Spock will too. Raphael is saying, what's the total cost for the setup? Like I said earlier, ballpark price for setup a calcium reactor is usually about $800. It can be a little bit higher than that. But like, for example, if you were to buy the Versa pumps to do two-part dosing with, those are $150 each, right? So that's $300 for two pumps. And then you have some nice little acrylic box like the one I showed a second ago. It's another $100 or $200, and then you're up to $500. Then you get your solutions, and those aren't very much, $20, $30 in powders, and you mix up your own solution. So you're around $550, $600 basically in materials. The calcium reactor that runs 24/7, and you don't have to mix more solution by hand. You don't have to check on the pump all the time. Is $200, $300 higher. So it comes down to, sometimes it's a convenience thing. You'll spend a little bit more for the convenience. And for me, mine came with a tank. So I was kind of blessed in that regard. But I had to buy a new regulator every year. I ended up buying the aquarium plants regulator, so that was money. I've had to replace the mag pump on that calcium reactor probably 3, possibly 4 times in 16 years. So there's a little bit of maintenance cost there. I'm still using it the way it is. I've had to fix a couple of fittings that broke, and I just cobbled it together with stuff I could find either online or at Home Depot. But other than that, it's doing exactly what it's supposed to do, like it did the first day I got it. Macy's daddy says, I have a 175-gallon tank currently dosing 2-part. Is it worth switching to a calcium reactor? And so what size calcium reactor? We kind of talked about this already, and I realize I'm always 20, 30 minutes behind on the questions, so I might have covered it earlier, but I wanted to kind of tackle it. There are people with big tanks that set up with big dosing containers, and they want to just dose. And I'm like, wow, really? Because now you're mixing up like 5 gallons of alkalinity, 5 gallons of calcium, 5 gallons of magnesium. It just sounds like so much work to me. It's like, oh, I can't stand it. And I had this one big sump customer in Dallas who wanted a huge top-off reservoir with a massive, I mean, it held like 4 or 5 gallons or 6 gallons of each of the 3-part. And within, I don't know, I'd say within a year or so, he stopped dosing and went to, I think he used Kalkwasser or he went with a calcium reactor. It actually is easier to use a calcium reactor than this to dose on these bigger systems. So, you know, is it worth it? Yes. And you want to get the right size rated for it. And you can check any brand you're looking at. If you're looking at Geo, you're looking at Aquamax, you're looking at My Reef Creation, Precision Marine out of Houston. They should all have ratings on what size their calcium reactor is rated for that size tank. I would believe that my calcium reactor is a little undersized for my tank. But that being said, I've had it on every tank since 2004. So it was on a 280. Then it was sitting in the sump while after the 280 leaked and it was running liquid into a 100-gallon feeding trough that had the fish and corals. Actually, it was 2 100-gallon troughs. And then we went into the 400 version 1. And I thought, oh, I hope this calcium reactor is going to be big enough. And it was. And after 13 months, the tank leaked. And then I had to set up a 215-gallon tank over there where the frag tank sits. And that tank ran for 18 months with the sump tied into that 215 that had the same calcium reactor. And then the 400 got set up over 6 years ago. And I'm still using that same calcium reactor. So I remember seeing a hobbyist in New York who had a fantastic SPS reef, just all SPS corals. It was gorgeous. And he opened a closet under the stairs. And that's where he had all his gear. And he had 2 calcium reactors side by side because he said one couldn't keep up. And I was thinking, wow, can you imagine having to run 2 of those? I mean, it's just double everything. It's not the end of the world. But I was really surprised that one wouldn't be able to keep up. But SPS corals love alkaline and calcium. Cindy says, do you have to use safety precautions with a CO2 tank? It looks a bit scary. No, CO2 is used in beer, it's used in sodas. Every restaurant you go to that makes drinks, any bar has one of these under the counter. And all it is CO2 gas. It makes carbonation. And I believe, I'm not positive, but I believe the guys that do airsoft and that do the paintball guns has a CO2 cartridge on them to blast those little pellets out. So CO2 is nothing to fear. It's not going to hurt you. If you open the tank to bleed out some air, it's going to go psh, and that's actually a smart practice. When you're about to connect a regulator to this and you've had it sitting in storage or you had it in your car after you filled it up, before you put the regulator on and tighten the nut down, you want to open the valve and close it. Just kind of blow out any kind of detritus, any kind of crap that might have got in there and make sure it's clean. You don't want to send any kind of stuff into the regulator and clog it. So you do a puff of air and close it, connect the tank, and then you use a big wrench to tighten it down. And you want to tighten it enough that it doesn't leak. So when let me turn this off so you guys can see. When you've got the regulator on there and you open the valve, one of the things that you can do to verify that it's not leaking gas, which has happened to me, is to get some soapy water, like some Dawn and water, a lot of Dawn and some water, and just kind of take a sponge and rub it on there. And if it bubbles, it's leaking air. And if there's no bubbles, if it looks wet, then there's no leak. But if it's blowing bubbles because of the soap in the soapy water, you'll know you need to tighten this down a little bit more with a wrench. So other than that, no big deal. These tanks don't last forever. Matter of fact, every time I go to the liquor store, they stare really hard at all these little impressions on the tank. And they look at the dates and like, this is expired, you need a new tank. They usually last about 5 years. And then you have to either have it re-inspected or you got to buy a new one and have them take back the old one. Let's see. Trent says, you rinse the old media and then refill. Do you rinse the new media before refilling? No. See, what happens is when you first set up a brand new one, everything's going to be nice and clean. And no big deal, it's ready to go. You add the water. It might look a little cloudy, just like adding sand to an aquarium. That's normal, but it'll just dissipate. You don't have to rinse it. It's clean. The reason I'm rinsing used is there's kind of like a sludge. The stuff, it's melting and it's kind of breaking down and the bottom gets the worst of it. And so I want to wash all the sludge out of my reactor so it's clean and the bubble plate in the bottom isn't clogged. And I am rinsing the media to kind of like rinse off the mulm or the slime. And now I have a nice clean media and I can just pour that in here and then I top off with more. That's all it is. It's not that it needs to be rinsed clean. I'm trying to remove the finer particles because I want big nuggets in there, big nuggets of media. And like I said, this stuff here is actually very fine. I like the larger kind that you saw me put in my refugium, and I'm just waiting for more to come in. For now, I'm actually using the fine one, and I'm like, oh, I want the large one. Okay. Gideon says, can you use Krylon Fusion spray paint on acrylic to black out a container? Yes, you can. And you're talking about painting on the outside. And if you were painting anything that's going to go on the inside of a tank, like PVC fittings, and you want to paint them with Krylon Fusion, you definitely can. It's Krylon Fusion for plastics, says it right on the can. Just make sure that the paint has 24 hours to dry before you get it wet. And then you should be good to go. For example, let's say the person that got this container wants to make it black on 3 sides. They could mask off the front. They could even put a piece of blue tape here down the side here, and then spray paint, and then remove the tape and have a nice line of clear acrylic that they can look through to see how much liquid is still inside over time. So you can do that as well. Samuel says, do you use the pH controller to set the pH, or do you change the bubble count as well occasionally as you increase effluent rate? There's so much to answer in that. Okay, so my bubble rate is my bubble rate. I never change it. Well, okay. If I'm impatient, which is not like me, but if I'm like, okay, my calcium reactor ran out of CO2 and it's completely, running at 8.3, and I hook up the brand new CO2 tank. I put the wrench on there, I tighten it. I put some soapy water and I check it. I'm like, okay, we're good to go. And it's going bubble, bubble, bubble. I'm like, oh. So I'm like, all right, and it's like bubble, 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 and I know I'm just putting this big burp of CO2 into the reactor, and you just watch the pH go 8.3, 7.1. It's really quick, and then I'll quickly switch it back to my sweet spot that I've found to be, which is like 0.8 of a bubble, 0.8 of a second. So it's sort of like instead of 1/1000, 2/1000, 3/1000, bubble, bubble, bubble. It's like bubble, 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 bubble. That's about the rate mine tends to run, maybe slightly slower than that. And I never touch that. That just is what it is for normal operation. If I do the impatient quick move, that's just because I want to hurry up and get the reactor close to where it belongs because I let it get away from me. But normally I'd never touch that. The effluent rate coming out, I always want to trickle. So I don't really care what the number is. Like someone said, 70 ml. I mean, I've had 80 ml coming out before just because I could read it on the Camor. If I didn't have the Camor, I wouldn't know how much water's coming out. I just see a steady trickle and I'm happy because trickling means that it won't stop. If it's dripping, and that's how people said to set up calcium reactors, they said to set them up where it drips out drip, 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 and I've never understood how that works. I don't know how a tank can keep up with a single drip of alkalinity. It's insane to me. So I've always done the steady trickle. I talked with Dwayne. He's the exact same way I am. He also does a trickle. We know a trickle doesn't stop, but a drip can stop dripping because it just takes one little minutia of something to stop the liquid from getting out. So at that point, your tank's not getting any alkaline or calcium. So the only thing that I would change, since the steady trickle is always the same, the bubble count is always the same, I'm actually changing the pH level. So I might go 6.9, I might go 6.8. I have used media in the past where I had to run it at 6.2 to keep up with my tank. But since running the Trident, I found that I can go all the way up to 6.7, which is crazy to me. But I've been doing it like this for 6, 8, no, probably 6 solid, no, this is probably 7 months. And I've been able to keep this running around 6.7, which is a lot higher than I'm used to. I'm used to it being even lower. So I hope that answered your question. Coral Lover says, how much does it cost to refill the calcium reactor per month? And so I can compare 2 parts. Well, we don't do anything per month. You know, when we set these up, we're setting it up to probably run 5-6 months straight without touching it. So you're looking at whatever media the reactor can hold, and odds are you're not filling it top to bottom with new media. You might be putting in 2/3 new media. So let's say you bought a jar for $25 of media, and you needed half of it to start the reactor, and you almost use the other half to refill the reactor 6 months later. So it costs you $25 for 6 months, you know, or no, for a year, because you're starting it for another 6 months. And then the CO2 tank will last as long as it lasts, depending on the size of the tank and how much media you're melting. That one's harder to gauge, but if you don't like refilling these CO2 tanks, you know, that are small, like a 5-pounder, you can get the 20-pound tank, and it might last your tank a year, year and a half, assuming it's not leaking around the threads and being wasted into the room. So obviously, do the soapy water test, just to make sure it's rock solid. And then, yeah, it could go a really long time. I really should have a big CO2 tank. And I remember one time I went to the liquor store with I have a bunch of these little tanks. And I went up there and they had this brand new, super tall one. Those really tall ones that are like human size that they used to fill up helium balloons at parties. And I was like, ooh, that would last me forever. And I said, how much is that? And they said, actually, you're just paying to fill it up. The tank is it's a loaner. And when it's empty, you refill it. And, you know, we'll just give you a new tank. And it was like painted yellow. It was just awesome. And I was like, oh. I said, okay, so how much does it cost to fill that up? And I feel like he said 80 or 90 bucks. I said, what if I don't need to refill it for like 3 years? And he looked at me like, what? And I'm like, I'm just hypothetically, let's say it lasts a really long time. Is that going to be a problem? And he's like, no. But I never went through it because it was huge. And it was going to be a big thing in my way for, you know, years. So I've been using these little tanks that fit under my electrical panel. Works out. But I could possibly switch to a 20-pound tank and put it over here next to this is the waste jug for the Trident. That's my wasted from tests. It's time to drain it. All right. But I would say, cost-wise, between buying 2-part and mixing it up manually and buying media and just letting it run nonstop for months on end without any real interaction on your part, might be slightly higher for the calcium reactor, but the less work makes it worth it. Me not having to worry about more solution and making sure that the dosing pump tubing isn't clogged. I mean, that calcium reactor just runs. It's awesome. I mean, you guys know I want everything to be as easy as it can be. Scott says, how often should I change up my Chemi Pure Blue? It's been in 2 weeks. The water's crystal clear. I love the show. Keep it real. I would have to default to you need to talk to Boyd Enterprises. I don't know the answer to that. I've never run Chemi Pure Blue. I've seen it a lot of times. A lot of times, though, when I see it, it's like a very small sample. I have a huge tank. I don't really see it being a benefit to my setup. I'm not running a small tank. If I had some cute little nano running on, you know, in my bedroom or something, I could see myself using it there and I'd have more information. I just have a feeling it's something you replace once a month, but I have no idea. So I'm just going to say I don't know. Please do your research and hopefully someone will get an answer to you. I feel like I answered that already. Like I said, I'm always behind on the chat. Trent says, I'm wondering, wouldn't you want to set it to dissolve as much as possible and then control that with a drip? Would that make it easier? No, we want to only melt as much as we need so that it lasts a long time. If you were to dissolve it as much as possible, basically trying to make a liquid solution, which is what we do with alkalinity dosing, you will end up with mush that the water can't even flow through properly. It becomes like mud in the bottom of the reactor. So instead, we have water flowing through it, we have CO2 bubbling into it, and like I said, it's a a bubble a second. So you don't actually see, when you look in the calcium reactor, if the acrylic is nice and clean, it's just clear water. You don't see anything in there. You don't see little bubbles blowing around if you're doing it right. And it's just melting off the very outer layer of the media to give your tank what it needs, and it continues to erode and erode, and that's why it gets smaller and the level drops in the reactor over time. But no, we're not trying to like have, like let's say we melted all this media all at once somehow with a super low pH, like pH of 5, and then you check the effluent and it's like 3,000 DKH. Then you would drip that out into your system. Every drop is like 100 DKH or something. That's a whole other thing, and we're not doing that with this. We're trying to output somewhere between 19 and 35 DKH. And like I said, when I measured mine a while back, I was very curious. And I put notes somewhere, but I'm going to have to do it again because I can't remember. But my calcium reactor at that time, this was before the trident dosing method I employed, it was 80 coming out, and then I measured the 2-part alkalinity that I mix up by hand because I was curious, and that was something like, man, I feel like it was 150. I mean, I pretty much used an entire test kit just testing 2 things. And that was that. And if you're using the HANA alkalinity checker, you can't even measure this stuff because it tops off at 20. It won't let you go higher. So you actually need a test kit like Saliford or Elos or something along those lines. Corey Reefer says, or he was telling coral lovers, that the calcium reactor could last you a solid year or longer, but it comes down to your demand, how much you are trying to maintain in the tank. I would say a few months or a couple of months is very unlikely unless it's a very small reactor. You should probably get 4, 5, 6 months out of a reactor before you have to touch it again. Same with a CO2 tank. It just comes down. I mean, I have a bigger tank, so maybe I'm using a little more quickly. On my 280, it went a much longer time because it was half the water volume. It was a 280 versus 450. So, Robert says, what size skimmer is that in your sump? So this behind me is the Nios 300. It's the Quantum 300. And I've had this, I did a whole video about this skimmer a few years ago. And I cleaned it up really nice, and it's already got detritus on the bottom, so it's looking kind of dirty. And on the top, I have a Vast Marine skimmer swabby. So there's a squeegee that cleans inside the neck, so it does its job, and then it drains into a waste collector. All that stuff is explained in the 6-year anniversary video, so be sure you watch that if you haven't yet. It was posted on the 1st of January, so it's very current information. XJet says, let's do a 6-hour marathon. I've got Crown Royal. Setting up a Reefer 300 with a skimmer and a trident. Very nice, buddy. I hope you're going to post some pictures of it. Mike Howard asked the question, which I kind of addressed earlier, but I'm just going to reiterate it again. He said, when I buy my calcium reactor, I'm going with the extra media chamber. So it's a 2-stage calcium reactor to help with the pH level in the display tank. Do you think it's worth it? I haven't done it. I've never seen the need, but I know people do it. And it could make a big difference. So, yeah, I mean, there's nothing wrong with doing it. It's not going to do any harm. It's not even going to waste the media. So why not? Give it a shot. See if you like it. See if you can tell the difference. You could run the calcium reactor with a second chamber, just water. In other words, there's no media in there, and just see how it runs and see what your tank pH runs. And then after you've made like or you've figured out the benchmark, and you're like, okay, my tank seems to run 8.2 to 8.4, for example. Then you could add the media and see if it's 8.3 to 8.5. You know, see what I'm saying? You could just see if it helped or if it made no difference at all. And then you'll know for yourself. But other than that, I mean, if it doesn't benefit your tank, you're going to have the second chamber that's always in your way. You're thinking, ugh. But like I said, I've thought about it so many times by adding it to mine just to make a difference, and it just seems like more work, so I just don't do it. But there are calcium reactors made with dual chambers intentionally where everything happens in the first one, and then the effluent goes into the second one, and then that trickles out. Specifically to raise the pH of the media in the effluent before it hits the water. Okay, Zach said that he has spent $30 a month on two-part. So let's take 2 years times 30. That's $720 that was spent in making two-part. And then running a calcium reactor for 2 years on 2 bags of media and a single 20-pound CO2 tank. So the difference, I mean, obviously, yeah, the upfront cost of all the gear was quite a bit, but over a long term, he's going to have saved all kinds of money. So he started with two-part, switched to calcium reactor, and sees the benefit. I am speaking for you. I think you're saying you were happy with that. Kevin Hayes, thank you so much for the super chat. I appreciate it. I'm glad that you're enjoying these videos. And to clarify, Trent says, what turns the media to mush is if the pH in the reactor gets too low. If it gets down to 6.2, 6.1, 6.0, 5.9, 5.8, if basically the CO2 tank doesn't stop because the solenoid failed, it can turn the reactor to mush. And then you just have to throw it away and refill it with new media and correct the problem so it doesn't happen twice. Martinez says, does the calcium reactor mess with ionic balance? I assume I will still need to add other micro and trace elements, and magnesium, of course, in some form. Yeah, it's based, well, okay. So, the back of this media that I use, I'm just going to read it to you guys. It's story time with Milev. Little Reborn is composed of sustainably harvested fossil skeleton remains of reef-building corals. When used in a calcium reactor where it is dissolved with CO2, Little Reborn not only replenishes calcium and carbonate alkalinity, it also replenishes strontium and trace elements in the same proportions they are used in corals to build their skeletons. In this way, Little Reborn exactly replaces what corals need to grow, and these dissolved fossils are born again when the live corals in your aquarium deposit the dissolved components. The size of Little Reborn makes it an ideal medium for post-calcium reactor pH adjustment, which is the thing we were just talking about with the secondary chamber. Little Reborn is aragonite, not calcite, so it dissolves completely without consuming excess CO2, and it says, hey, will not turn to mush. These features combined with very low phosphate and silicate content mean that Little Reborn is the ideal media to use for promoting the growth of live corals, clams, calcareous algae, and other calcifying creatures in the reef aquarium. I have turned it to mush. It is possible, but rarely. Out of 16 years, maybe 2 times that happened. And like I said, it just took an hour to resolve the problem. So, will you need to add anything else? It's a possibility. I mean, I dose Prodibio to my tank twice a month. I'm doing Acropower, which is amino acids. I'm using Benareef, which is a food that has bacteria in it as well. So these, plus all the foods I use have things in them as well. So all these things replenish my tank. Dustin says, how long can live rock be out of water before it starts to die? I want to knock off the vermitid snails and putty some of the live rock together. Well, I hate putting live rock in the air. Obviously, you can pull... Okay, so if you pull the rock out into the air for like 10 minutes to knock off these vermitids, and then you put it back in the tank and you pull out the next rock and you knock off vermitids, and you just kind of work your way systematically through them one after another, no rock is out of the water more than 10 minutes. 10, 15 minutes tops. Nothing weird should happen. However, if there are any visible sponges on the live rock that you've pulled out of your tank, as soon as it's exposed to air, the sponge will die. When the sponge dies, it releases ammonia. When you put the rock back in the tank, you put ammonia in your tank, which could cause a mini cycle. So I prefer to only get rock out of the tank long enough to do what I got to do and put it right back in, and I would putty it together inside the tank. And keep in mind that when you use too much putty all in one session, like you're bonding this rock and this rock and this rock and this rock, your protein skimmer might just start overflowing like crazy from the chemical in the water coming off the putty. So that is a factor. You could run some carbon in a reactor to help absorb some of that putty chemical, but your protein skimmer might need to be adjusted down so it won't overflow like a volcano. But others have taken rock out and just dealt with what they had to do, or they drained a lot of water out of the tank and worked in the tank and then refilled with water. But there's a good chance the tank will have some form of cycle, because bacteria will die off the longer the rock is exposed to air. So you could be working in the tank, and maybe you're working the upper strata, and so you've done a big water change and you've lowered the tank like half full and all the rock sticking out the top. You're using putty here and there above. You could even pour water over the rock to kind of get it wet and keep going. That might help. But I try as much as possible not to expose rock to air. It's personal preference. And I hope that helps. Okay, so Rob's Reef, I'm not going to answer that question until I see what happens, but so far so good. I'm a little concerned that what I used might break down the tubing that's right here that the liquid goes through, because the rollers are hitting that tubing, and I don't know if the chemical will break it down. I need to find out if it's if it deteriorates. Like, for example, let's say you put WD-40 on dosing tubing, I think it kind of screws it up. And I need to see, but the stuff I used was something I need to use on Minion, and I thought, Minion's a full-on machine. I'm going to try this on my little clickety-clackety machine, and now it's not clickety-clacketing, and I'm like, this is great. It did make the noise in the beginning, but now I've been running it for like a year, and it's kind of, I just thought, let me try this stuff. So I'll tell you guys, but I need to kind of see what happened. Because if I tell you this and you get it and then things go wrong, you're going to say, well, Mark told me. So I'd rather not tell you until I know that it's safe. Also, my Camor is on top of the sump, and if anything were to drip out underneath, I would see it on the acrylic, which I want to know, obviously, if the stuff is going to drip. So let me find out, and then I'll get back to you. I just want to verify. But so far, I'm pretty pleased with what took me 10 minutes to do. So I'll let you know, just not yet. Rick Cam says, can the Camor X1 Bluetooth dosing pump run continuously? No. That's this one right here. And I use it to dose magnesium or AcroPower, whatever's in the jug, that current time. And it cycles on and off. It is not designed for continuous duty. This Camor is designed for continuous duty. That's why it costs more. So you can't take a $60 pump and expect it to do what the $300 pump can do. Okay. Dylan says, is dosing calc solution through my ATO okay until I can upgrade to a calcium reactor? I have a 40-gallon system, mostly soft corals. So you said a calc solution. I'm thinking you're talking about kalkwasser, correct? And kalkwasser is pickling lime, is... man, I haven't thought of what it's actually called, the chemistry term, in forever. But people have used it as their top-off. The only risk of using kalkwasser as your top-off to maintain alkaline calcium is that if the top-off doesn't stop and it puts too much in, because kalkwasser has a pH of 12. And so if you put it, you've got a 40-gallon tank. Let's say it normally tops off half a gallon once a day, over the period of a day, half a gallon. It's putting in a pH of 12, half a gallon out of 40 gallons. So it's going to barely be a blip on a pH probe. However, what if it topped off 4 gallons in a 40-gallon pH of 12? Your pH on the tank will probably be 8.7, 8.8, 8.9. And you have soft corals. They're not super demanding. They are semi-hardy, but they could take a hit. And if you get too much kalkwasser in the tank, what happens is the tank turns milky white and things start dying. Fish start dying, corals start imploding, cycle starts. And so that is the downside of kalkwasser in a top-off container. So I've always said if you were going to use kalkwasser, I would much rather you fill up a reservoir that puts in a fixed amount every day. Like, let's say you had a jug mounted right here that could not fall, and it had a little spigot on the side, sort of like a tea jar. And every night before you went to sleep, you poured in a half a gallon of kalkwasser and let it just drip in quietly all night long. It would maintain the pH in the tank during the nighttime, and the jug is empty in the morning, or essentially empty. And then the next day you do another half gallon. And the next day you do another half gallon. And that way it can never have too much because you're only giving it a half a gallon to use. So if I were to use kalkwasser on my tank, I picture myself being super cautious with it and putting a 1 gallon jug on the side. And when I've been to public aquariums, when I go behind the scenes, a lot of times I'll see a 5 gallon bucket standing on the edge of the concrete enclosure, you know, the thing that holds it all together, and it's dripping kalkwasser in. They filled up that bucket with 5 gallons worth, and it's just dripping in until the thing is empty, and then they refill it once a day. That's what they do. They don't hook up a Camor, or they don't have it tied into their top off. They literally put it into a bucket to avoid a disaster that could wipe out the tank. Robert says, what pressure should be on the pressure gauges of the CO2 tank? Well, the one gauge is going to be whatever the gas is in the tank, whatever that is. It could be 1,200 psi, 1,000, 800. Obviously, as it gets lower, it's actually coming out of the tank slower, and then the pressure of the gauge going toward the calcium reactor would be 6 psi. And all of this is in the article that's linked in this video's description video. Sorry, this video's description. And also in this chat, I've seen the link put here a couple times about how to set up a calcium reactor. So you guys, I would definitely read that. You know, just using a YouTube video to set one up is probably not your best bet. You can learn a lot of things, but there's a lot of information in that calcium reactor article on my website. Okay, this is a good one. Macy's Daddy says, let's talk about CO2 tanks. How big can they be? Where can I get them filled? How long do they last? I'm able to get this refilled at a liquor store, but you can't go to any liquor store. You have to ask them, do you refill CO2 tanks? So your best bet is to look up liquor stores in your area and then call them and see. Another place you can go is going to be gas companies, like gas, for welding. And you know, they sell oxygen, acetylene, and CO2. And a lot of times you can just bring them an empty tank and they'll have a used one that's full, and you just trade and give them some money. And so if you love your tank, like let's say you spent 80, 85 bucks in your tank and you had your name engraved in the side, you're not going to want to give them your tank. You're going to say, refill my tank. But a lot of people do the swap, sort of like they do with propane bottles on a grill. And so some kind of air gas company, welding supply, or liquor store are the 3 places to get CO2 tanks. And then the size comes down to the space you have. A lot of people probably don't have room for a 20-pound tank because they're so big. This one will fit under a tank, and I've even seen people install them on their side. You can actually install these on their side. That won't cause any problems because it's, I don't know why, it just works. It's nice to know. There's certain gases you can't do that with. CO2 you can. And when you get the tank filled up, you're going to be waiting for a while. Like when I go to the liquor store, by the time they take my tank to the back and they start doing their thing, it feels like 10, 12 minutes till they come back with my tank full of gas. And it usually comes back really, really cold. Also, when you're transporting these in your car, you don't want it to fall over. You definitely don't want the neck to break off like in every movie you've ever seen when this thing rockets across the room. I prefer to lie it down. I'm sure every company out there would say you got to drive it with it standing up. I also, because I love my vehicle, will put down a huge towel, and then I put the tank on top of the towel so it won't mess up the fabric of the seats. And that also helps keep it from rolling around because it's kind of snuggied in. I don't seatbelt it, but that's kind of the things. Now, they do have a shelf life. They only last a certain amount of years, and then they have to be inspected. And what they'll do is the person inspecting it will remove this piece right here, and they will look inside, and they look for cracks. They look for mold or mildew, or I don't even know what else they look for. And if everything passes muster, they will then get out their metal stamp, and they will stamp a new number in the side, clank, for another good for another 5 years. And you can keep using it. So it's not like it's disposable at 5 to 8 years. it's something that can be recertified to be safe to use. But once the stamp expires, no one's going to fill it until it gets reinspected. And reinspections might cost $40, apparently. Shane says, does it matter if my alkalinity swings 0.5 over a 24-hour period, or is that perfectly normal? At night, my alkalinity swings up a few points. Yes, that is perfectly fine. And there's a good chance your alkalinity swings up during the night because your corals aren't absorbing it while they're sleeping. And then during the daytime, they absorb it, which pulls it down. And so you're dosing around the clock, and so it's bringing it up during the night. That makes sense. Reef and Dive says, other than ICP, is there a way to keep track of dosing trace elements when using a calcium reactor? Right now I dose 1, 2, and 3 with aquaforce balling, which replenishes very close to the consumption. I don't know. The aquaforce regime is very specific. I don't know how or where you tie in the calcium reactor into that regime. You'd have to ask those guys. They have a group on Facebook. They could answer that question. I want to tackle this one really quick. Matto says, what pH will dissolve calcite media? We don't use calcite, we use aragonite. That's very, very important. And 7.1 and below will dissolve it. I used to always recommend 6.5, but now I'm actually using a little bit higher. Alan says, how much do you want for your Peacemaker? It's sold, the one that I had that was used. So I'm building new ones. I've got quite a few to build right now. Those are on my website. They're $100. And I make a rimless version, and I make a version that fits on the Eurobrace. So if you need the kind that hangs on the Eurobrace, I need to know the width of your tank so I can make the top piece long enough so it can rest on the Eurobrace brackets. Tim says, you need to reward yourself with some coral shopping. Where am I going to put these corals? My tank's kind of full again. CJ Aquarium says, are millies hard to find these days? I haven't seen any locally. Try frag swaps. And of course, there's going to be companies like Cherry Corals that sells millies. There's going to be hobbyists that have them too. And you might be able to trade with someone that's in your local area. Dave says, there's a big debate on whether to push or pull through your calcium reactor. Doesn't matter. The whole pulling through the reactor, like I said earlier in this stream, I blame BRS for that. One guy on there said, I recommend you pull it through, and oh my God, it became doctrine. But no, we push it in. And pushing it in works perfectly fine. It will not cause any problems with your reactor at all. It will do the job, and it will do it well. And it's how I've always done it. It's how everyone did it until BRS said to pull it through the reactor. So, I mean, like you said, it's a big debate. To me, it's not a debate at all. You push the water into the reactor, just like you push water into every other reactor you own. You push water into the protein skimmer, you push water into the carbon, you push water into GFO, you push water into biopellets, you push water into GAC. Everything gets, and you even push water back into your tank. You don't pull it through, you push it. Same thing with calcium reactors. I don't know if that's going to end the debate, but that's my answer. Mojave says, do you prefer a certain brand of calcium reactor, or are they all pretty good across the board? I've been using LifeReef for a long time, and it does really well. Jeff is out of Denver, and he builds them himself. And I believe he builds them, oh, well, last I spoke with him was a long time ago, and he said he built them once a year. Like every February, he built calcium reactors. And so if you needed any kind of parts, you had to buy it around that time of year, because otherwise he didn't have it in stock. You know, the pieces you needed. I was like, what? He's like, yeah, I won't have anything until February. I'm like, oh, okay. That's why I had to cobble together a solution once when I broke something. But Geo's Reef has a great reputation. So if you're looking for a calcium reactor, you might look at Geo's Reef. Tim says, how about an update on the performance of the Trident? Do you think there's a problem with the magnesium accuracy that needs to be worked out? I don't know. I still don't know, and I don't know if I'll ever figure that part out. The main reason for the Trident for me has always been alkalinity measuring, because it measures 4 times a day. And that has been great for my tank, and it has really helped stabilize things, and I have all kinds of coral growth. So I'm very happy about that. The calcium and the magnesium testing, it's a nice side effect, but I'm also testing those manually each week. I recently replaced my ELOS test kit with a new one, because it was empty and it had been a year. And the newer one is measuring higher than the old one, which is making me think I have plenty of magnesium. As you guys know, I've been dosing magnesium for I don't know how many months, let's say 3 months in a row, after no magnesium for 8 months. During the 8-month period, as I mentioned before in my streams, the Trident continued to tell me my magnesium was over 1400. That's why I didn't dose any for 8 months. But I lost a whole bunch of monopora that just basically turned very pale, and a lot of it died and was covered in algae, and others were pale, and when I did my big clean out for the 6-year anniversary video, you saw me pull out a bunch of stuff, and I saved some scraps, threw them on the sand bed, and dosed magnesium again, and all those scraps that were pale got their color back. And now I've got green Montipora, I've got purple Montipora, I've got acros that were pale that have colored up and gotten richer in color and look great. And the weird thing is, I didn't see the Trident say, hey, your magnesium keeps going up because you've been dosing it every day. And I don't know why that is. If I didn't dose it at all for 8 months, I would expect the measurement to come down a little bit every month as it's being used up and running out. And then when I start dosing, I should see it going uphill. And I didn't see that. And I don't know why I don't see that. And I don't understand it. But I do know my tank likes a gallon of magnesium every month. So whether it says I need it or not, I don't care. I'm going to put it in the tank. And right now I have it off for the last week. And I noticed my magnesium came down about 0.50, 0.50. It came down 50 points. So it went from like 1500 to 1450 last weekend. I'm going to test again today and we'll see where I'm at. It might be 1400 today. And I mean, that's around the number the Trident says it is anyway, but the corals look better. So it's kind of hard to know what to believe. Sometimes you just have to go with your gut as well. Even though we have all this science to help us, sometimes we have to kind of just go back to the basics. Coral Lover says, how about using a CO2 regulator with solenoid? It is cheaper. Yes, it is. You can, like I said, Milwaukee makes one for about $100. And a lot of people use them. I just found that they don't last long enough. That's why I stopped buying them. Harkins Aquatics says, why not put the effluent into your refugium to feed the caulerpa? What ends up happening, the water flow going through the refugium oftentimes is slower than it is the rest of the sump, and you end up getting this weird calcification happening inside the refugium zone, and your reef starts to go in decline because it's not getting what it needs. The calcium reactor feeds the reef. It does not feed the refugium. So it's actually not a good idea to put it in there. You would think, oh, the little bit of CO2 is going to benefit the plants, but it doesn't benefit the reef. The alkalinity does not keep up. So it's best to have it drip right into the return zone as close to the return pump as possible. Insane Reefer says, I have my tank in the basement. My concern is I've not been able to keep pH within range. What are your thoughts on that, and how would you resolve it? Because it's in the basement, there's probably a lack of fresh air, and there is very likely an excess of CO2 down there, because you go down there and you breathe, and you have pets that breathe, and you might have a furnace or gas-powered heat or cooking or water heaters, and all those things are affecting the air down there. You probably need some fresh air to be pumped into that room. And then you could also run some like RO tubing from the air intake of your protein skimmer straight outside a window or through an eave or through the baseboard, the wall of your basement, to suck fresh air into the protein skimmer. And that can help. Your basement probably needs some kind of ventilation anyway, and I would recommend pumping in fresh air in and letting it force basement air out, rather than trying to use a fan to blow the basement room air outside. I would pump in fresh air. But, any kind of ventilation would be better than none. So if you don't want to blow in cold air because of winter and you want to vent it out, you can do that. And they even have inline vents where you have tubing and then there's a big fan that looks like a donut, and then the tubing goes out the wall and it would just suck air out of the room and humidity and moisture and all that and pump it outside. And that will help. I went to one house, I feel like I was in Atlanta, Georgia, very humid area, and the guy's house was literally falling apart. It was so bad. I mean, he had wood floors that were warped and buckled, and you're walking and you're like walking over this uneven boards. And I'm talking boards this high. I'm not talking about, little ridges. It was insane. And I told that guy, I said, you have got to ventilate this basement. And he had a ton of tanks, a lot of water, and no ventilation. It was bad. The humidity was destroying his home. I felt bad for him and his family because it was a really nice house from the outside, but inside it was just being destroyed by aquariums. Mina says, thank you for the super chat, says, my ammonia is 0.25 ppm. I've been cycling for 52 days and I'm using live rock. 0.25 is nothing to worry about. Sometimes our test kits will show a very small amount of ammonia. That's okay. If you're a 0.5, 0.75, 1.0, that'd be a problem. I have tested tanks that showed 0.25 and I didn't really give it much thought. So I think you've probably got it behind you. If your nitrite is 0, if your nitrate is 20 or less, you're probably ready to add your livestock. But 0.25, you're probably going to always see that little bit because it's always cycling a little tiny bit every time you feed the tank. And the fish pee into the water, they're adding a little smack of ammonia to the water. Reef Tank Project says, glad there's a new stream today. I'm getting used to them. Keep up the good work. Yeah, we've had something like, I don't know, Andrea likes to tell us how many. I think we're up to, I don't know, over 100 live streams. No, maybe there's 110 now. I don't know. We try to do it every Saturday unless I'm traveling. Alan says, would you recommend a calcium reactor for a 90-gallon tank? Yeah, you could do it. You might like it. It's going to take some space. You don't have a lot of room under a 90-gallon. That's the thing. And, every inch matters. That's what she said. It really is important to have everything fit your stand. So you may find you don't have the space for a calcium reactor under a 90, but you could have it adjacent. And if you have it next to the tank, there is the chance, if you run a calcium reactor externally, there's a chance that if it were to leak, it's leaking on the floor next to your aquarium until you notice. So I prefer if it was in the sump. Now, if you could put it on a stand, so it's up higher, and you're like, hey, look at my calcium reactor. People are like, what the heck is that thing? That's crazy. And you say, yeah, it's awesome, right? If you had that on a stand up high, and it was sitting in a tray made of acrylic with a bulkhead out the side, if this thing were to leak, it would leak into the tray, and as a tray filled up with water, that water would trickle through the bulkhead and back into your sump. At least you're not losing water on the floor, and the tray cannot overflow because of the bulkhead and the feed going to your sump. Now, the one thing you need to keep in mind is you have to keep the tray clean. If you have this drip tray, that's great, but let's say this thing hasn't leaked in 18 months, and then today it decides it's going to leak, and you have all this dust in there, and then the effluent or the drip or whatever you want to call it, the liquid coming out of the calcium reactor is getting in all that dust, and then it flows down the pipe and it sends all that crap into your sump. That wouldn't be good. So make sure you clean the tray periodically so that way if there was a leak, first of all, you could see the leak, and secondarily, you're not going to have any kind of dirt get into your sump accidentally. All right. We have 252 people on here right now, and I'm going to end this thing soon. We've been going for over 2 hours, and I need to get up soon before I can't feel my legs anymore. It's a little cramped in here, but I thought I'd be comfortable, but not forever. Mass says, did you know that Tunzi has a nano calcium reactor? Actually, there's a few brands of nano calcium reactors I've seen. I've just never used one. And it's kind of awesome. You can get a little tiny CO2 tank, and you could set one up. I've never done it myself. It would be kind of fun. I wonder what those cost. It will literally be manual control of that one. You cannot tie that into the whole pH controller thing that I got going for the big tank. But that would be really neat. Oh my God, Aaron's aquarium showed up on the live stream. I don't know if he's still here because this is always 20 minutes ago. But if he's here, we all need a curry, apparently, if we're going to do a live stream. He would always say, grab a curry and let's stream. I'm like, what's a curry? Let's see. And yes, Rob's Reef is correct. You could use the ORP output on the Apex as the secondary pH probe that you put in the calcium reactor instead of having to buy the PM1. But if you want to measure ORP, you need the ORP probe. But if you're like, oh, I don't care about ORP, I never measure it, then you can actually have two pH probes. One measures the tank, one measures the calcium reactor, and that is completely doable. He's 100% correct, which saves you a little bit more money. Insane Reefer says, you said to push the water through the calcium reactor. Do you have any concern on the hose busting due to the pressure if the output were to clog? Nope. No fear whatsoever. Has never happened. You know the tubing on your RO system has like 60 or 80 or 100 PSI going through it? Are you ever worried about that tubing busting? Same principle. We're not even remotely close to that pressure. And Lamont, thank you very much for the super chat. I appreciate it. You didn't ask a question. Matt's Reef says, do you have your RO straight into the sump? Has the float valve ever failed? Okay, so what you may be seeing over here, this is part of the ATK, which, I guess I'll switch this here for a second. And it's explained in the 6-year anniversary video. Switch to this. So, I don't know if I can get this, let me turn this word off of here. I don't run my RODI system directly to the sump. Absolutely not. I highly recommend against it. So, this is the ATK bracket. And this is the ATK version 1, actually. I don't even have the version 2 installed. And on the back side, on this side, are 2 optical sensors that measure the water level in the sump at all times. And then this orange tubing goes up and into that big container right there that has 45 gallons of RODI water. You can't even see it, it's so crystal clear. There you go, now you can kind of see it. So that's the RODI water for top off. This tops off my tank for about 11 days in a row. I usually refill it about every 6 days, so it's always full. And there's a pump inside there that's sitting way down on the bottom, which you can almost see. Yep, there it is, right down there. And that pump pushes water up the orange tubing, and then it comes out the top and goes into this float assembly here that I was showing you. And it trickles in. And if for some reason the pump wouldn't turn off, when the float rises, it won't allow any more water to get into the sump. So it's a physical way to stop water from going into my sump if the ATK pump won't turn off. But that hasn't happened. But no, I absolutely do not run an RODI system directly to my sump, ever. I never have, I never will. It's too dangerous because an RODI system is dead silent, as you know. And how many times have you just tried to fill up a bucket with water and forgot and flooded your home? And if you are tying in an RO line directly into your sump with a float, if something goes wrong, which at some point something absolutely will go wrong, you will end up regretting it because your salinity will plummet and you'll start losing livestock. And it becomes a big catch-up, trying to solve the problem. I have not run into that problem whatsoever. because I've never done that. I always have a container holding a fixed amount of, of fresh water for top off. And even if the entire thing went into my system in one day, which has never ever happened, it's not enough water to plummet my salinity. Just can't do it. Moshi says, I have the Shurin calcium reactor, which I've been using. It's the best-selling reactor in Israel. I don't have any problems with it, and I didn't hear of any other reefers in Israel having problems with them. No, actually, that has a really good reputation, and the media that that reactor uses was very popular, or is very popular, and I actually used some of it once, because but that was the one time when I had to run my reactor at 6.2, because I couldn't dissolve it. Those reef bones, or whatever they called their media, how do you say it? Shurin? Media was really, really dense, and it took a lot of pH to melt that stuff down, but it worked great. I did it once. Andrew, I will try and catch up with all my emails this whole week. I've haphazardly only looked at some emails, and I owe a lot of replies, so I will try to tackle yours as well. Heron Aquatics says, do you think it's okay to use safety stop on fish that have been imported, traveling from longer periods than from the LFS? Any idea on formalin and methylene blue amounts in the product? I think it's a ½ ounce of each part in the product, and I've used it with all sorts of fish, whether they were bought online. I haven't, well, no. I had some fish come in from Hawaii. I guess that's kind of like a direct import, you know, overnight flight and everything. And that one, they went through safety stop. But remember, you're acclimating your new fish, wherever it comes from, to your tank water. And after it's acclimated, then you put it in safety stop. So, shouldn't be a problem. The formalin and the methylene blue are designed to remove external parasites. It's not going to handle anything internal. So if the fish has worms in its stomach, for example, it'll still have worms when it comes out of the bath. But I don't believe you'll have any problems with wherever you get your fish, whether it's a fish store or you're buying them online. Hey, Kevin, I'm glad to hear you're getting everything set up. You have been super patient. Yeah, so that first container came out great. The second one's all cut out. I just need to start gluing it, hoping like in the next few days I can say, hey, come pick these guys up and get your order finally filled. You've waited way too long. I appreciate your patience, though. I don't know how you did that. I don't know how you forgave me that many times. Mr. Reefbuster says, I'm about to introduce a rose bubble tip anemone to my tank. I need to source a plastic mesh I can cover the power head. Any idea where I can get it? Some people have used leaf guard material from like Home Depot or Lowe's, like you'd put in a gutter and they cut it with scissors and they wrap it around the pump and create like a cage. That's one method. You can use some of the cellulose sponge material used for filtration. Other companies, there's guys 3D printing specific cages you can put on anything these days. I don't know if you have a MaxiJet, I don't know what kind of pump you're using, but maybe somebody has 3D printed something you put on there that you could buy and keep your anemone safe. Homegrown Reefer says, I'm using Bionic. If I add the same amount of each, the calcium will not go up. 11, here's tank is 11 DKH and his calcium's 370. Yeah, it's a little low. I've done large water changes to get the parameters back correctly. Adding different amounts, I run out. Well, yeah, of course you will. So what you're going to do, you're going to stop dosing alkalinity for like 3 days, and you're going to double your dose of your calcium for those same 3 days, and measure and see where you're at in 3 days from now. And hopefully your alkalinity will be somewhere around 10. and your calcium's around 425. And then you can go back to dosing the same amount each time. But 2-part dosing, if everything's exactly right, even if you put in equal parts every single day like you're supposed to do, at some point something's going to start growing and absorbing quickly, and it's going to throw things off, and you have to make adjustments. And you might be putting in more alkalinity and less calcium, or more calcium and less alkalinity. That's just how it is. That's okay. I mean, you're going to have one bottle last longer than the other. There's nothing wrong with that. Dave says, what is the evaporation rate on your big tank? How much ATO water do you go through? Bigger tanks have more evaporation. I expected this tank to evaporate 7 gallons of water a day when I set it up. And then I sat back and I watched. And I thought, I have no idea how much it's using. So one day, my friend Wes sent me a picture of his top-off container, and it had a Post-it and a Post-it and a Post-it and a Post-it, like stair steps. I'm like, why are there Post-its on the front of your top-off container? And he said, that's how I can see how much water is being used each day. And I was like, that's a great idea. So I copied him, and I did the exact same thing with a Post-it, a Post-it, a Post-it, a Post-it for 7 days. And then I could use math to figure out the internal length, width, and height of that zone that was empty. And it came out that my tank evaporates 3.6 gallons of water a day, which is half of what I expected. I really thought it would be more, because my 280 used to evaporate 5 gallons a day. Now, the 280 was in a slightly smaller version of this fish room, and it had an air conditioner unit in the wall, and that thing must have been pulling out more water possibly, because the new fish room doesn't have an air conditioner blowing in here, though I did add a vent about 6 months ago, and man, is it nice. It's, I'll show you guys. So what happened was these guys had to come in and put new ductwork in my house, and I said, can you give me a vent right there? And so they did, and I can actually sit here right now, and even though I know the room's getting kind of warm, I can feel the cool air from the AC blowing down on me while I'm doing the stream. So that's really nice. Lynn says, I made it to the live stream, but I never get the notification, though. There is a chance that you didn't get one, that YouTube just never sends it. You've got to subscribe to the channel, you got to click the bell, and you got to make sure that you receive YouTube notifications on your phone. Because if you've turned off that in the actual app, when you go to settings and you go to the YouTube app and then you say notifications off, you'll never get notified. But you got to make sure it's on. The downside is if you're subscribed to 15 channels, you'll get notifications from each channel telling you there's a new video up. But if you can get past that, then yeah, you should get a notification. Just remember our live streams are 2 o'clock on Saturday, Central Time. CZ Why Not says, my tank recently had a huge uptake of magnesium. What can cause this? My tank consumes 15 ppm per day. I need to dose 150 milliliters of Bionic per day. So you're talking about magnesium. Are you also talking about Bionic's magnesium dose? It takes a lot of magnesium to raise the magnesium of your tank. It's crazy. Like Dwayne recently did a thing about his Trident, and he posted in the Neptune group 4 days ago how he took a half a gallon of magnesium, just poured it into the sump, glug, 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 glug. No dosing, just poured it in, because he also has a 450-gallon system or something to that degree. And he watched the Trident measure, and the next measurement showed that it went up 20 points. So he was like, man, I put in a half a gallon, it only went up 20 ppm. But, it actually does take a lot. And I remember back in the day when I was mixing up magnesium by hand and pouring it in, I'd fill up 2-liter bottles, and I'd pour in 2 liters at a time into my sump to get magnesium up where it belonged. The thing that drinks magnesium is Montipora. So if you have Montipora species in your tank, and of course coralline algae will use up some too, these two things use up magnesium like crazy, and that's why we have to replenish. And it really doesn't matter how much you're adding as long as the number is staying stable in your tank. If your tank needs 40 ml of magnesium a day, so be it. If it only needs 5, then that's what you need. You just have to figure out what it needs and give it what it needs to keep the number stable all the time. You know, that's not a bad idea. Screams Reef says, I think Spock should be named T'Pol. That makes sense since Spock is a girl. But it's too late to change her name. She's had it for 16 years. So we're going to stick with it. I was talking to my friend Caitlin about the cleaner wrasse. I said, you know, the cleaner wrasse needs a name. Why don't you help me? And she said, how about Consuela? And I was like, no, we can't do that. I said, what if it's a boy? And she said, Consuelos? So I don't think that name is going to stick. I think I'm going to keep thinking. But Consuelos is funny. Let's see. Insane Reefer says, which of the Prodibio products did you overdose in conjunction with the biopellets reactor? I did a video about it, and it wasn't like any certain one I overdosed. I just clearly found a way to overdose the bacteria with the regular dose. So basically, putting in the right amount of Prodibio, which was 1 vial of each flavor, into my tank, in conjunction with a biopellet reactor, was able to supercharge and create this nuclear meltdown in my tank that made some of my corals lose all their green. It was the craziest thing ever. And I remember, because you know they swear, you cannot overdose our product. And my biopellet reactor completely turned to pudding. It all evaporated away, and my protein skimmer was just full of sludge. As I was pouring it into the sink, it looked like Jell-O. I thought, will this even go down the drain? Oh my God, will this clog the drain? And it was just ruined biopellet media. Craziest thing ever. I actually had to stop biopellets and stop dosing Prodibio for about 3 months just to let the tank rebound, and then everything got back to normal, and then I resumed my normal Prodibio dose. But it wasn't like Bioptim did it, which it might have been that one. Or it could have been Biodigest, and it digested all the biopellets. I don't know. Ariel says, what are your thoughts on the small and large Camor pumps? I like the Camor pumps. I've been running a couple of them now for over a year. And I like the little X1. And now they've got the 4-head, which has different colors on each head, which is kind of fun to look at. I don't know why you need different colors, but it's interesting. I haven't tried that one. I've only tried the single. And then, of course, I've been using the FXP, which is this one right here. So I'm very happy with them. Very, very happy. Reef King says, is a calcium reactor just for SPS tanks and LPS tanks only? It definitely benefits tanks that need alkaline and calcium. A fish-only system or a tank with softies probably will do just fine with only water changes and probably won't need any kind of dosing. We typically only begin to dose 2-part or have a calcium reactor when we're putting in stony corals. So yes, it's going to be for LPS and SPS systems. Reef 101, thank you very much for the super chat. I appreciate that. So Ross wants me to talk about the Trident shelf. He asked me to build him a little shelf that will hang on the inside of his door that the Trident will fit in, and he's been waiting patiently. So it is on my hit list of things to do this week. And I think he wants you guys to see it, so I will build it this week. You'll see it next Saturday, and then I'll ship it to him. Are you happy, Ross? Let's see. I see you guys talking about algae reactors. I'm not sure what you're talking about. Are you talking about the thing where you put LED lights around an acrylic tube and you're trying to grow Chetamorpha? Or are you talking about a turf scrubber? You know, I just see comments from people talking about where can I put an algae reactor. So I can't answer that until I know more of what you're talking about. Ben, that's perfect. If you tagged me in the Facebook group, I'll see it. I highly recommend it. Wow. Fish Guy says, my yellow coarse wrasse has been hiding for 33 days now after I added a cold tang and a yellow tang to the 60-gallon. At what point should I lose hope? I'd kind of lost hope by now already. I mean, that's over a month you haven't seen this fish, not a single time. That's weird. Have you looked early in the morning? like before the tangs come out to swim, to see if it might be showing its face. I mean, if it's been in the sand bed that long, I don't know how it would have enough reserves in its body to stay alive. You know, it's got to come out to eat. So obviously you fed the tank during those 33 days. Have you seen anything that give you a hint that it's in the rockwork hiding in the back? Or maybe it's in the overflow box and you don't even realize it, and you need to rescue it from there. It might be stuck back there just out of sight. Yes, you can. Mr. Wheelock says you can measure the effluent with a Hanna checker by diluting the sample and then multiplying it. You'd have to dilute the heck out of it. It's just easier to use a regular titration test kit and get past the digital thing. It's just not that important for this one test, and that way you know. William says, I burned through my CO2 tank in a month. I wasn't running the recirculating pump. Would that be likely the cause? It's a Corlin 302 with a carbon doser. Yes, I would say you have to recirculate because you're pumping in the bubble of CO2 and you need that to go through the reactor. So why would you not have the recirculating pump turned on in the first place? Insane Reefer says, where would you recommend putting the temp and pH probes? At the beginning, I would have my pH probe in the first chamber where all the bubbles would hit it. I heard it should go in the refugium. Again, the refugium zone usually has a slower flow area, so it's less accurate. Mine are right here. Let me move the word so you can see. They're right here, and this is where the water is pouring. Ugh. I don't know if you can see that. This is where the water is pouring in, and the probes are right in front of that water that's flowing straight across my sump. And there's no bubbles in my skimmer zone whatsoever, so no bubbles get on that probe. Now, when I restart the return pump every single night, I'm sure some air burps up through there, but it hasn't affected the probes or how they're measuring that I can see. But another place you can put the probes that's great would be between the baffles, because water has to go over and under the baffle, so it's like right where it's getting hit with fresh water constantly. So that's a good spot. You're very welcome, Steve. I was glad to get them out quickly. I have more on the way because those sell out very quickly from my website. They'll probably be here on Monday or Tuesday. Q-Ball says, I'm starting a 10-gallon in my bedroom using media, rock, water from my existing reef, but new Carib Sea live sand. Should I expect a new cycle? Well, I mean, you kind of need a cycle. Just because you're using used water or used rock doesn't mean the tank doesn't have a need for bacteria. We always cycle our new tanks. If you're doing a tank transfer, you might avoid most of a cycle. But yeah, start a new tank, just cycle it. Last week's live stream, the first 45 minutes, talked about starting a brand new tank. So maybe check out that one and see what was discussed on that video. You don't have to watch the whole 3 hours, just the first 45 minutes or so. George says he's new here and he loves it. Me too. Thumbs up, buddy. Josh says, your sump looks bigger than my house. How are you finding the Trident? All the best on reefing. Thank you very much. I'm liking it. I just replaced the alkalinity solution or reagent because it had just run down to the last few drops. And so that is all on top. And now I can just open up my app. I can look at what's going on. Let's see what the numbers are right now. And like I said, I haven't tested my water yet today. I'm still going to do that after the stream is over. So right now, the Trident says that my alkalinity is 9.05, my calcium is 416, and my magnesium is 1459. And by the way, there's a new AOS, Apex operating system, that dropped, so it's ready for an update. So if you guys have an Apex, you need to update your firmware. Oh! Someone says medical gas companies do swaps as well for CO2 tanks. And one person said they're paying $15 to exchange tanks. I think I pay like $12 to fill up this tank. Slade, I had to show the calcium reactor, so I had to show the sump today. I can't have that tank behind me. Every video gets boring. Hamada says, what are some nano 20-gallon reef-safe fish that have tons of personality? Oh, I'd say the Lawnmower Blenny, the Royal Grama, the green goby, unlike the yellow goby or clown goby. The green one's better. It's more reef safe. Pipefish. If you wanted a lot of sand in that 20-gallon, be kind of cool to have garden eels. You need a lot of sand and a little bit of water on top. That's kind of what I was thinking I might do with my refugium if for some reason my refugium ever went completely kablooey. And just, if all the macroalgae died from running the turf scrubber, then I was thinking about garden eels down there. That would be really neat. Reef and dive, good question. Of course you'd have scuba tanks. Could you use scuba tank for CO2? I am assuming the answer is yes, but I don't know for sure. We know that they're designed to hold air. I don't know the rules of CO2 versus ambient air, but maybe yes. And, those are big tanks. But the thing is, you need the threaded part for the regulator, and your diving tanks have that weird D connection for the D clip. So I don't know how you connect a regulator to it. Plus, then if you want to go diving, because you are reef dive by name, you would need to take your calcium reactor offline, drain the CO2, and put in some air, right? So maybe not the greatest idea. But that's funny that you asked that. Natural Hat Trick says, if you can't fit any more corals in your tank, it's time for another tank. Well, that or I need to clean out some clutter and make room for some new stuff. Malcolm asked, what did he miss? You guys can tell him. Osama says, do you recommend any magnesium media for calcium reactors? I just dose it separately. I have the calcium reactor that takes care of the two things, which is alkaline and calcium, and I just dose magnesium as needed with a dosing pump. It just seems simpler. I've tried a couple of things that went in the reactor and just didn't do anything notable to me. Glenn Smith said, last year you had clownfish in your sump. Is it safe and well? Yeah, all the fish are out of the sump. There are 5 fish over in the frag tank that I ignore nonstop. That needs to be reset. I keep talking about that. I should stop doing a stream so that way I can quit saying I'll do that someday. Tim says, buy some Chivas Regal Scotch for next Saturday. I'm not a Scotch guy. I'll let you buy it and you can drink it. And you can tell me how delicious it is. Insane Reefer says, when starting to cycle a reef tank, can you just add a shrimp? Yes. And wait 30 days, or do you have to add some bacteria in conjunction? No. You put the shrimp in, you let it rot for 3 days, and then you remove the carcass and just wait for the tank to finish the cycle. That's it. Joseph says that he has, well, I'm not sure what he said. He said, I hate purple and yellow tangs. They keep killing each other. I buy one, it kills the other. Okay, so if you are putting a new tang into an established tank with a dominant tang, you're going to have aggression, which could lead to the death of the new guy. A brand new fish that's being introduced in the tank is stressed out, and it's releasing some kind of a pheromone. I don't know, it's probably the wrong terminology. It releases some kind of stress trigger in the water that tells the other fish, attack me, which is crazy. So if you can keep the new fish calm, like in my case, I always use the Peacemaker, which is a box full of holes that's mounted in the tank, and I put the new fish in there. They can see it, and it's stressed out, but it's inside its safe 4 walls where it can't be hurt. There's a lid on top so it won't jump. And I feed it when I feed the reef. I feed that new fish and the reef. at the same time every single day, a couple times a day. And that way the stress level drops on the new fish. The other fish see the new fish, but they can't do anything to it. And then after 3 days of this, I can pour the new fish in the tank and it just joins the family and there's no aggression. I think your method probably isn't doing what I'm doing. Maybe you're getting a new fish, it's in a bag, you acclimate, you release. Or maybe you get a fish, you acclimate, it goes in quarantine, and then you take it out of quarantine with a net, and you just drop it in your tank, and boom, there's a conflict. So if you could go the peacemaker route, which is what I highly recommend, then you could possibly introduce a new tang to your existing tang. The other choice is take out the tang you have right now and maybe put it temporarily in the sump or in a hospital tank or quarantine tank, introduce your new fish, let it get used to the tank for a few days, then take the aggressive tang and put it back in the tank, and maybe it won't be as aggressive. It also helps sometimes to change all your rock work, to change all the territories. So when you put these tangs in, they don't know what home is because it's all different. And they kind of work it all out because they're trying to find their nooks and crannies that they love. And they just don't have the energy to go fight the new fish. So these are some thoughts that maybe will help you. I don't know. Or maybe stop buying tangs if they keep killing each other because you're just adding to the problem. You know, I'm not trying to be a jerk. I'm just like, try some more docile fish and enjoy the tang that you do have that's doing well. David says, are you going to Reefapalooza in Orlando? It's not on my plans right now. I think it's in April. I've got a few trips planned this year, and I need to actually get them on my calendar because they're just in my head, and that's a terrible way to plan for the future. Yvonne says, could we have a discussion on tangs, care, and different species? I'm ready to add fish to my Red Sea 200, and I want to add some tangs. Yeah, I think we could. I don't have a ton of tang experience. I mean, I've only kept 6 kinds, but I mean, that's 6 more than 0. So I guess we could do that. Yeah, we'll save that one. Maybe we'll do that one next week. Kevin says, are you still using Remag? No, I'm not. Ariel says, are you using the calcium reactor with the Trident at the same time? Yes, the Trident only measures water. The calcium reactor is outputting the needs of the tank. The Trident then measures and then can communicate via the controller and actually disable or enable things. Some people will use the Trident to control 2-part dosing. Add alkalinity, stop adding alkalinity, add more calcium, stop adding calcium. You know, so they can set it up that way. It's called Trident controlled dosing. I'm using the Trident specifically to watch, regulate alkalinity and keep it from getting out of range. And so far it's working great. Odile, thank you very much for the super chat. I appreciate that. Michael Wells asked me a math question. Hang on a second, guys. Okay, so he says, what are your thoughts on automatic water changing with the dose, changing 6 liters a day on a 1,000-liter tank? Do you think it's more stable than doing a 20% water change once a month? If you do 6 liters a day, my math says you're not even changing 20%. You're changing less than 20. So, because that would be 180 liters out of 1,000. You'd have to change 200 to change 20%. So the nice thing about small water changes is the water you're putting in, temperature isn't as much an issue because you're putting in so little. Putting in 6 liters of new salt water into 1,000 liters, the tank won't even know what happened. It's like top-off water to it, you know? But you might have to put in 7 liters a day to hit your 20%. Does it work as effectively? According to Randy Holmes Farley, doing daily water changes or doing one big water change is pretty much the same thing. It's not, one does not supersede the other and do a greater job like some might expect. And he did all the math. It's an article from way back in 2002, 2003, and you can check it out. But the nice thing, like I said, you can have a smaller amount of water being switched. You can drain it away quietly because you're not moving so much water at once. Draining and replacing 200 liters at once must be a lot of work. Ozreefer says, my different nitrate test kits show 10, 25, and 50. The tank looks great, the SPS are great, and there's no algae in the tank. Any idea what's making my test results so different? I have no idea. How frustrating is that? Yeah, it would be nice to know which kit is telling the truth. I guess you could do an ICP test, and of course, when you send that in, measure with all your kits again, and that way, and somehow in your notes say this is Elos, this is Salifert, this is API or whatever, and then when you get your ICP, see which one matches the one test that is the most which one matches that test kit, and then toss the other two out so you limit your confusion. That would be my recommendation. Crisis Films said a nice thing. First time getting to watch your streams. I love, been wanting to forever. Oh, to catch the stream, yeah. I appreciate, he says, I love the content and been reefing for 15 years and your channel is amazing. Thank you. I really appreciate that. It's nice to hear those kind of things. And Odile says, or I always say it, Odile, I always say it wrong. He said, thanks for being such a good teacher. You have helped me understand so much. Well, that's the whole point. We're trying to make it where you can walk away from this and say, okay, I can try that. And yeah, we'll get you added to the group. Tim says, I really enjoyed the close-ups and the top-down footage you had in the anniversary video. That's the most gigantic, awesome chalice. How long have you had it? Most chalices I've had for years. I don't buy new ones. I just keep maintaining the ones I have. So it could be 5, 6 years old maybe, more than likely. Possibly older and was in the temporary tank and got moved into the 400 version 2.0. So there's a possibility maybe it's 7, 8 years, Just depends on which ones we're talking about. Fishbar Aquarius says, by filling the calcium reactor to the top, will it reduce the CO2? This may allow the pH to lower quickly, also on a slower bubble count. No. I can tell you this. When my calcium reactor, I'm using this as an example, when my calcium reactor is filled with media and the effluent coming out is maintaining my DKH, it's going great. But as this media shrinks down to this much left, my tank is not getting enough alkalinity and it starts to, because there's a lack of volume, and you can see the DKH dropping gradually test after test after test. So the benefit of the Trident is it tests every 6 hours, so it really can't get away from me because I'll get notified. But when my reactor's down 4 or 5 inches, 6 inches, that's when I'm ready to put some more in. And sometimes I just loosen the top, I stop the flow to the reactor, I stop the recirculating pump, I loosen the lid right there in the sump, I just pour more media in, put the lid back on top, tighten the screws, and turn everything back on. And it's right back in business 5 minutes later. But then when it starts to look disgusting, that's when I want to pull it out and I want to clean it out completely and use a sponge and wipe down the inner walls so I can see through it clearly, rinse the media that was used, put in more media, and top it off to the top. But if there's not, the media doesn't block the CO2. CO2 is a gas, it's an air. And you're not going to get more CO2 in that reactor based on the amount of media. It's still the same amount of CO2 going in. It's just there's less media to melt, so you're getting less effluent. Your DKH is lower coming out, which means there's not enough for the tank to maintain what it needs. Kevin says, why do leopard wrasses hate me? I don't know. Why don't you be nice to them for once? Nick says, can I pay you to do a FaceTime meeting with me and help me figure out why I'm having issues binding acrylic? I'm ready to beat my head against a wall. Yes, we can definitely do that. Corey Strong says, I'm moving soon from an apartment into a house, and I have over 60 corals and over 200 frags in my 55-gallon and my 10-gallon. Wow. Do you have any tips for a good move? Should I set up a system at the house before I move? Yes. If you could set up the tank in the new house first, get it cycled, get it stable, make sure everything's right, make sure you have a couple of circuits going to that tank like the video from last week talked about, and it's all rock solid. That way when you move all your stuff, you're putting it into a nice, safe, established tank versus trying to tear down, move, set up, put everything back in, and hope it lives. The better the stability, the more chance of success. Also, all your frags, maybe they're on frag trays, you can take the tray out of the tank, put it in a cooler, drain some tank water into the cooler, bring the cooler to the other house, lift the tray out of the tank and put it into the new one. I mean, that's kind of how I see it. So you're not manhandling it and touching everything. And then just let it sit. Don't mess with it. Make sure the tank is running smooth. And then in a few days, then you can think about planting corals on rockwork or whatever. But don't just handle it the same day. It's just putting too many corals through too much stress. And he says, how long should the tanks cycle? I would say, the normal amount, 3-4 weeks. Let's see. Dr. Andreas says, what do you recommend to polish scratches off the inner side? You're talking about inside the aquarium. Are we talking about acrylic or are we talking about glass? And I got to end the stream soon. My legs can't take this much longer. If the tank is acrylic, it can be polished from the inside. A friend of mine had a method of doing it with a cleaning magnet and different grits of sandpaper, and he did it every winter. And it took weeks, working his way grit after grit after grit to polish out all the scratches, make it look brand new. It was amazing. And he also used I think it was called a diatomaceous filter, which caught all the little bits of acrylic that he sanded off. That tiny bit of particulates. I mean, nowadays, I guess a 10 micron sock would do the same thing, but that filter was his method. And he had a beautiful reef. His name online is ReefKeeper2, and he got Tank of the Month twice in reefkeeping.com. So you can Google ReefKeeper2, Tank of the Month, TOTM, and reefkeeping.com, and you'll find his tank. You'll love it. And that tank would get scratched up, and every winter he made it look brand new again. But it was all made of acrylic. Glass, can't do anything about it. Reef King says, what's the best coral in your tank? I guess a lithophyllon. It's about this big around, and I got it, I think, in 2011, and it was this big. It's a very slow grower, and it's like a major showpiece on the front of my reef, dead center near the bottom. And then some people really love a couple of my chalices too. Oscar says, I'm about to set up a reactor within the next week or two. Do you have a recommendation for media? The folks over at Marsh, which is the Houston club, recommended Two Little Fishies. Yes, you want Two Little Fishies Reborn. It comes in large and it comes in little. This is, I've shown little in the stream. This stuff right here is little. Actually says it on the label, little. And then there's the large version, which is the nuggets I like, but haven't been able to get into my inventory. I'm still waiting for it to show up. Brian says, what app do you use to log your results in? I use ReefTrace. So ReefTrace, I'm a partner in. I don't get paid, but I'm a partner anyway. And I use it to log all my parameters. And you can see the last 4 weeks have been plotted on there for January. I'm about to put in today's, and then I'll have 5 weeks. My goal is this year to put in my numbers in the app every week, 52 weeks in a row. So I'm hoping to get that to happen and not fall off the bandwagon. Michael Harvey says, can I use sea salt from the grocery store? Nope, you can't. Oh, nice. Kevin says that for the Dallas area people, you can go to Fish Gallery to refill your CO2 tanks. That's very rare that a fish store fills CO2 tanks. That's awesome. Richard, I would honestly tell you there's probably zero savings in money for a calcium reactor versus dosing. If anything, the calcium reactor might cost you more, but there's less work involved, and that's what makes it worth it. It's constant. It does its job. You don't have to keep dealing with it. It just does it. It's sort of like a protein skimmer. It's just on. It does its job. So that's why I like it. And that kind of answers Ben's question. Do you think calcium reactors are better than dosing? Yes. I hate dosing. Even with dosing pumps, I hate it. Caleb says, what should I do about my sand clumping up? I dosed 2 parts of my tank. The past few weeks, my alkaline has been 7.4. My calcium is 500. I can't get the alk to go back up. Okay, so you got a couple things going on. Stop dosing calcium for the next few days, or maybe a week, and measure and see if it has come down. And then wherever your sand has clumped into like bricks, just loosen that piece and remove it from your tank and throw it away. And that's no more clump sand. Don't break it up in your tank because you'll have horrible things happen. I don't know why it happens, but clumped sand that you break up because you're trying to make it into sand again, it does something. I don't know. It's a chemical reaction. Something happens, and your corals start going into decline. I'm just trying to save you the headache. Whatever clumped, just pull it out. You need to dose alkaline in the mornings. You need to dose calcium in the evenings. But for now, don't dose any calcium at all until it comes down to about 425. And then resume back to dosing. But you want to, and your alkaline, it's a little low, and you knew that. You said you can't make it come up. You need to make sure you're dosing into an area of high flow, whether you're pouring it in by hand or you're trickling it in with a dosing pump. It needs to be right in front of a nozzle that's moving water, or a gyre, or a vortex, or a Jabo. It's got to be in a high flow area so it's mixing as soon as it hits the water, so it doesn't become a puddle of alkaline that just drops like a rock and helps calcify your sand. Drew, that's the whole point. I know we talk forever. We do these super long live streams. Oh my God, 3 hours. Okay, we got to end this thing. And Corey Page is here from the Boston Reefers Club. He has a beautiful SPS reef, guys. I'm hoping to see it in person one day. Aquarimate, I believe, is a monthly subscription too, where Reef Trace is a one-time fee. I think it's $3.99. Reef King, thank you very much for the super chat. That's awesome. Anthony says, with automatic water changes, my nitrate has finally got down to 5 ppm. It was 30 or better for almost a year. That's great. John Snyder says, when using the Salifert nitrate test kit, do you look at your results from the top or from the side? I'm seeing a big difference in color. Yeah, actually, you need to follow the instructions really carefully on that, because if it's a certain level, you have to look through the side, and if it's a different level, you look from above. And I'll tell you, I used to see Habib, the guy that owns Salifert at MACNA, and every year he told me, you're doing it wrong. So if there's a video about it, watch that. If there's an article about it, read that. If the instructions can spell it out, find out which way to do it, because there is a right and there is a wrong way. And like I said, and I haven't used it in so long, I can't tell you the right way anymore. I just forgot. I actually need to refresh my own mind on that one. But in the meantime, I've been using API and ELOS for my nitrate tests. So with those, there is no top, down, or side view. It is what it is. Mike, thank you very much for the super chat. I appreciate that. Surprised you're still going. Me too. I don't know what this is, but there's a super chat involved there. Thank you, Alex. I guess he's calling me pear-shaped because I reached for my cup of coffee. And Reef and Dive, thank you also for the super chat. I appreciate it. And Stifler Steve says he has a calcium reactor in his kitchen. I'm assuming it has coffee beans in it, and I think I do too. GTA 5 Vid says, how come some of my corals release a slime with a coating of food when I feed them Reefroids or Coral Frenzy, usually my Aussie Torch and mushrooms? Some corals will slime. but it shouldn't be from putting food in the tank. Maybe you're using too much food per session, and you could dial it back and see if that helps a little bit. You want to make sure you have good flow in the tank too. You know, if you've stopped the flow in the tank and you're using a lot of food, you're really changing a lot of dynamics in the reef tank. I just recommend turning off the return pump if you have a sump. If you don't have a sump and you just have the display tank, you know, a lot of people like to turn off all the pumps to feed their corals and they're feeding directly at them. That works too, but maybe you're using too much if your corals are sliming. I mean, some corals have a feeding response, but what you typed doesn't sound like a feeding response. It sounds more like a defense strategy. So try feeding a little less. See if that maybe helps reduce what you're seeing. Hope that helps. Chris says, what are your thoughts on, and this is the last question, what are your thoughts on the lower pH with a calcium reactor? Is there a way to keep the pH up? So, Chris, the calcium reactor will lower the pH of the tank by 0.2, which is just a small amount. It's not a big deal. So I wouldn't sweat that. And if you want to raise it up, I've read, that you can have the effluent trickle through additional media in a second chamber. This one guy years ago had Tank of the Month, and he took a Coca-Cola bottle, you know, the green glass, and he drilled a small hole in the bottom, and then he filled the Coke bottle with aragonite media, and the calcium reactor dripped into the bottle, and it would trickle through the media and then come out the hole in the side of the bottle. So he had a Coca-Cola bottle in the sump, and he said that that helped his pH go up a little bit, so it wouldn't quite drop down as much. So the same principle, that is one method that may help. Other people have decided when running a calcium reactor they want to run kalkwasser because you've got the low pH coming out of the reactor and you've got the high pH coming out of the kalkwasser, which evens out, but I've never done that. So that is all I can really tell you on that one. Tim, thank you very much for the final super chat of the day. I am now going to tell everyone it is time to test your water. It is Saturday. Please do not test your water. Get all your test kits. Don't just test one thing. Alkalinity, calcium, magnesium, nitrate, phosphate, salinity, temperature, pH. Measure it all. Log it. Use Reef Trace. It's a great app. Share your results with us on Instagram or on Facebook because we want to see how you're doing. We want to see your tanks. We want to hear your stories. We want to hear your solutions to problems. We love it when you help others that don't know as much as you do. So feel free to chime in. And if you don't know something, just say, I don't know. Say, you know what, I don't know. But here's a stream that Mark talked about it for 7 hours. Go watch that. Oh, my streams are too long. Guys, I hope you have a great weekend. We will have another live stream next Saturday at 2 p.m. And I hope to release a video probably by the Clearacy this week during the midweek. So that's something to look forward to. All right, guys, have a great weekend, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.